About 10 years ago, I moved into a loft apartment into a building which had formerly been a Catholic school. The stone entryways on either side of the building, they still read boys and girls as it had been co-ed but gender separated. When I first moved in, it was extremely pleasant there, a very positive, homey feeling. My apartment had formerly been a classroom with windows all along the exterior wall, and was always well lit by either the sun or the streetlights. My dad, he lived nearby and I visited him at least once a week. At the time he was doing a PhD in metaphysics and had become increasingly interested in the paranormal. Tarot, shamanism, witchcraft, meditation, star charts, Reiki, etc. And I knew that he was practicing this in his home as well. I honestly thought that it was cool, and before moving into the apartment that I had lived with him for a couple of months, I was rarely uncomfortable or afraid. About 2 months after I had moved into the new apartment, the tone of it just seemed to change all of a sudden. It wasn't really negative, and I struggled to describe what felt different, but the best that I can get to is that the former felt light and feminine, while the latter was harder and more masculine. I just figured at the time that the honeymoon period was over. It steadily got stranger, however, and I began to feel that I was never alone in the apartment. It didn't feel frightening, more sad and awkward, I guess. It was at first only in my apartment, but then I started to feel it as soon as I entered the building, like it had seen me coming and waited at the door for me. It progressed to my cat noticing something too, and refusing to go near the entryway to my bathroom. In fact, she would often go towards the kitchen and meow like somebody was there. At night, she would go berserk as if being chased. She often ended up on a narrow ledge above my bed, but only during this time. I just chalked this all up to cat weirdness. I mean, those little guys do crazy things, right? But then I started to feel it too. The bathroom felt strange. Sad, like deep regret. I started avoiding the bathroom too, taking the fastest showers that I could and hurrying through my morning routine. Since it was a loft apartment, the bedroom was raised above our feet off the main floor and separated from the main room by a tall partial wall. From my bed, I could see into the bathroom on the same raised level and down the short staircase partly into the kitchen. Often when I was in my bed, I would sense something move from the bathroom, down the stairs, and into the kitchen. Sometimes I saw darkness out of the corner of my eye. Sometimes I only felt it, but couldn't see it. I assumed that I was just scaring myself because I disliked the bathroom, but hey, it was what it was. I finally told my dad about it though, expecting him to laugh, but he only replied nonchalantly that he'd had experience like that in his house before I moved in. His step-nephews had been visiting one night. Both were between 7 and 10 years old. While having dinner with them, one looked up past the kitchen and said that a big black mass was floating in the doorway. Nobody else could see it, but the boy wasn't afraid and said that it had disappeared. Dad said after I moved out that he stopped feeling whatever it was and seeing shadows and assumed that it was transient and had moved on. It did. It seemed to have moved in with me. Now, things got exponentially worse when my boyfriend came to visit for a week. I'd mentioned how I didn't feel alone in the apartment, but hadn't talked about the rest of it. And the first night that he was there, he woke me up to say that my cat was going crazy and had gotten up onto the ledge above the bed, but he hadn't seen her get up there, despite the fact that he could see the entire length of it, and the back wall of the ledge was 12 feet tall. She was just suddenly up there, which really didn't make sense. He was weirded out by it, but I told him cats often get the zoomies at night, and it was probably nothing. But the next day, I came home from work, and he was just shaken. He said that he'd been on his laptop on the couch and started to feel watched. Looking up, he saw a male figure staring at him from the kitchen. He said that it was like a shadow person, but fearing that it was an actual intruder, he ran towards it, only for it to disappear. I then came clean about everything that I'd experienced, and he got really upset that I hadn't told him. He started going to the library while I was at work to avoid being there alone, in fact. He often stayed up later, though, than I did, since I went to bed at about 9 to get up at 5 for work, and told me that he often saw shadows move from the bathroom down the stairs to the kitchen. He described them as small and close to the ground, like he was only seeing shadowy feet or something. His stay was extended out to a month, though, because I decided to move in with him, unrelated to the haunting, since he'd come to stay mostly to see if we could cohabitate well. The next week, before I moved, was definitely the worst by far, though. The apartment, it felt angry. While sitting on the bottom stair organizing books, my boyfriend, sitting facing me, trying to hand me things, I felt something walk by behind me, and whatever it was blocked the light as it passed by. I started to say something, and he said that the shadow man had walked by behind me from the bathroom in the direction of the bed. He was so disturbed by this that he actually teared up, saying that it hated him and blamed him that I was moving out. We decided to move me out a few days sooner, and we packed a little quicker. During this time, we didn't see anything else, though the apartment still felt charged and very unwelcoming. I figured that it would follow me to his apartment, but I haven't experienced anything that I couldn't explain since. I still have no idea what it was, why it followed me, or why I'd stayed in that apartment, but to be honest, I'm just glad to be free of it. I live in an apartment building that has 4 apartments on each floor. The apartments are split into 2 groups by something that we call a bubble. Basically, 2 apartments share this bubble, and there is a metal door guarding them before each tenant goes to their own doors. Now, my husband works as a doctor, so he had to go to work for his night shift. I usually do house chores when he goes to work, so the house is clean when he comes back in the morning. I turn on the Scary Stories podcast on my Xbox and do my work. I have 2 cats, Xena, who is 5 years old, and Marcel, who is 3 months old, that are usually very playful during the nighttime. At one point, they both stop chasing each other and they stare at the door without moving or blinking. Xena, my eldest, having her back curled and silently hisses under the door. She never expresses such behavior. She's really one of the chillest and laid-back cats there is, so having her react like that made me very curious. At the same time, one of the stories that I was listening to was about home invaders. Also, from the local news, we had been informed how most of the time said invaders will check on houses that they want to break into and learn the owner's schedules and such before trying to break into the home. This obviously made me feel very insecure, and so I turned the volume lower in order to hear what was going on the other side of the door, which, by the way, it is impossible to get to unless you unlock the first metal door, which is the sole purpose of extra protection for my neighbor's apartment. My neighbor is a lonely old lady that has 2 cats of her own and is ironically the building manager as well. It must have been around midnight though, and she was most likely sound asleep by this point. I turn the volume to my TV down and I go closer to the door, having Xena still not moved from her position, pressing my ear against the door, searching for sounds. But I couldn't hear much, except a distinguished sound of a very heavy breathing, like an alcoholic breathing heavily almost. It gave me goosebumps, and I immediately started looking around the house for something to defend myself with, in a worst-case scenario, thinking that if he broke past the metal door all by himself, then my apartment door might not be much of a challenge for him. I took my husband's baseball bat and I held onto it with my life. I took my cats and hid them in the cupboard under the sink. I don't know why, I just don't have children yet, but this was what just came to mind at first, and went back to the door. I opened the peephole and see a person breathing at my door at midnight, and my heart sunk to my stomach. All I could see was one eye, a very veiny red and sort of popped out eye staring back at me, followed by repeated and faster breathing as if it knew that I was watching back. I didn't move or make a sound, hoping that it would make the creep go away, but that was not the case. Even when I moved back from the door, I see the doorknob move frantically. He was now trying to get inside, murmuring something that I couldn't make out, as if on a frenzy. I freeze, holding the baseball bat to my shoulder, basically preparing myself to bash out this guy's head if he managed to get inside. As he was trying desperately to get inside, fighting with both the doorknob and the keyhole because I could hear noises coming from the keyhole, an idea came to mind. I rush to the living room, which is very close to the entrance door, and blast out scary story podcast sounds. And luckily, the specific story was narrated by a guy with a very heavy voice. From the outside, it almost sounded like there was someone inside the apartment having a conversation, mostly a monologue, I would guess. I live in a country where English is not a native language and few people speak it, but at last, what I prayed would work actually did. The moment that I blasted the volume to max, the doorknob stopped moving, the breathing ceased, and as I went back to the door and checked the peephole for that creepy guy, he was no longer there, but the metal outside door was now wide open. Of course, my neighbor only now wakes up from my podcast basically screaming in my house, asking me to turn it down. I tell her what happened and how come she didn't hear anything. She said that she had her TV on as well, as she sleeps with it on, so she doesn't feel alone, and she just didn't hear the conundrum going on in the hallway between our apartments. We both examined the metal door, asking each other if we had left it open. Even called my husband at work to see if he did the same thing, and he told me that he actually locked it twice as usual. I don't know what I would have done if this expert in door breaking actually managed to break into my house that night, but I do think that he had it out for me and my cats. I never thought of that, of all the possibilities of salvation, that these scary podcasts would be the one thing to save my life, but yeah, it was, and it was indirect, of course, but still, I'm thankful that that guy didn't get in. This is about a bad experience that I had when I went camping on the beach in the summer with my boyfriend. We had the nice idea of camping on the beach instead of going to a hotel, since I always wanted to sleep and hear the waves hitting the shore, see the night sky whenever I wanted, and just live this experience at least once in my life. We were supposed to stay in our tent for a week. The area had public restrooms with showers and restaurants, so the matter of hygiene and hunger wasn't an issue. We bought all the supplies that we needed for such an adventure: a 2-person tent which was blacked out, the sun rays wouldn't come in, an inflatable mattress, a first aid kit, lanterns for the tent, etc., etc. The first nights, too, were really no issue. We actually enjoyed every moment of it. We would always take all of our valuables with us in backpacks in case anything bad would happen to our tent: phone chargers, wallets, stuff like that. We weren't the only people that camped in that area. There were plenty of people that would camp there, either single people, couples, or even families sometimes, which includes even people that behaved badly as well. When nighttime came, you would occasionally hear people laughing, partying, dancing, listening to music and smoking, taking drugs, of course, or drinking a lot of alcohol as well. We didn't mind it though, as nobody had bothered anyone for the past 4 days and nights. People were just having fun as they knew best, and nobody was being aggressive or anything like that, so we were all good. On one night, though, we stayed out later than we usually did, around 1 a.m., just wandering around the lively streets to listen to street performers, eating out and such, when we stopped at one of such street performers, who seemed to have a lot of people encircling him and listening to his music. We realized he wasn't the main character, though, that the people were gathered for, because in the middle of the crowded street, where cars would occasionally pass by, was a middle-aged woman dancing completely naked, clearly affected by the abuse of alcohol and or consummation of drugs. She was incoherent though. She would randomly flirt with people, she would expose herself while dancing to the music, despite the disgust of the musician and the passerbyers. We didn't stick around for too long and decided to leave back to our tent, and just have a drink in silence while watching the stars and falling asleep to the sounds of the ocean. While drinking ourselves, we would hear some lady shouting in the distance. It was probably the same woman that we had seen before. But she wasn't alone now. She had friends with her, 2 women. They had a camp set on the same beach with us, a few tents further from us, but not far enough so that we couldn't hear them or see them, even if it was dark. They had a lit fire on the beach, and they continued to drink and smoke and dance around it. She, of course, was still naked, but this time she was wearing a see-through skirt. She goes in the ocean for what seems like an eternity. I remember thinking, how is she not cold? That water must be freezing. And my boyfriend, he just shrugged and told me not to be bothered. If we don't engage with her or them, they really shouldn't annoy us. So I did as I was told, but even so, I always felt as if I was being watched. I put my thoughts aside though. We decided to go to sleep, but being a beautiful night and the air being as warm as it was, we thought of not closing the tent completely, just zip the mosquito cover so the air would circulate inside the tent and have the sunshine in the morning and wake us up early. Now, I don't really recall how long I'd been sleeping for, but I remember being awoken by footsteps circling our tent, a womanly voice humming a song softly. The tent was not very thick. You could hear everything outside of it. I was too afraid to look out. Heck, I was too afraid to even change my position as to not indicate to the outsider that I noticed their presence. All I did was lay down and look outside through the mosquito cover. All of a sudden, though, I hear footsteps stop above my head and a voice whispering, "Don't be afraid, I want to sing you a lullaby." I also noticed that whoever this person was, with the shadow, they had something in their hand, their right hand, and the footsteps, they began to circle the tent. I see her feet in front of our tent passing by, noticing the very familiar long see-through skirt blowing behind her. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night after that, and I just laid there listening. The next morning, we packed our tent and we moved to a different area of the beach, further away as possible from that woman and her friends. In April 2011, a friend and I were stargazing on my roof on a dry, clear night in New Jersey. We were observing the Lyrid's meteor shower that wasn't producing as many shooting stars as we had hoped, but we stayed up there, intensely focused on the sky, to see one every few minutes. After a couple of hours of this, we caught a bright light in our peripherals. We turned around and we see what looks like a bright blue-white LED flashlight traveling into the forest behind the house. At first instinct, we thought that it was the police with a flashlight chasing someone, but then we realized that the light was up in the treetops, weaving through the canopy. All we could do was say, "What the heck is that?" over and over again as it got closer to us. It was traveling along the direction of the river behind our house and seemed to notice us because as it passed the back of my house, it slowed to a gentle stop, then took a 90-degree turn onto the clearing of our property, maybe about 40 feet from us, coming straight toward us, as if it had noticed us and wanted to check us out. This is when we got our first really good look at it. It was a perfectly defined glowing sphere of light, the size of a basketball, with what seemed like churning sort of flowing plasma inside of it. Icy blue-white hue, emitting absolutely no sound at all. We started screaming at this point. As it approached, it moved very slowly compared to the pace that it had been traveling through the trees. It seemed almost cautious in its movement. It's weird, but you could sense some form of intention or intelligence in its movement. We were horrified because we knew nothing could explain what we were seeing. and we weren't about to mess around and find out by letting it get any closer. We scrambled off the roof and ran inside, hiding under a blanket like scared little children, even though we were in our late teens at this point. We didn't talk about it much after that because, well, we just really couldn't explain it. About a year later, though, one of my neighbors is banging on my door, telling me to let him in. He told me that him and a friend were down by the river in the same patch of woods and were chased by a floating silent light ball. This obviously freaked me out because I assumed that he was telling the truth because I had never told him the story of my encounter. This is a small summary of the environment where the experience happened, just for context. I grew up with toxic parents and I developed depression through the years and cried a lot in the corner of my room. I attempted self-deletion twice there too. I shared my room with my younger sister who was badly abused by my mother. A lot of crying happened in that room from her side as well. This is to say that it was a very negative era in our lives, and during that time, I had multiple sleep paralysis episodes, and also believed that I experienced astral projection, even though at the time I thought that a spirit was trying to pull me out of my body. So, the story started when my younger sister went to visit my cousin, and my cousin told her that she was possessed by a demon, and showed her what the demon told her to do. It was a ritual to break up a couple in the neighborhood, among other things that included a mirror and smoke, etc. And her mother was moving from one psychiatrist to another to try to explain her behavior and treat her. The conclusion was that my cousin was schizophrenic because she saw and talked to someone that didn't exist. Just as a side note too, our family is the type of family that even if they did witness a demon face to face, they wouldn't believe it, and would try to get a medical or scientific explanation to it all. Anyway, my sister, 15 and female at the time, comes back from visiting my cousin terrified and told me, 22-year-old female at the time, all about what happened, and I'm like, okay, that's bull, but I listen to her and comfort her as much as I can. She swears that she felt a spirit during the rituals though, and I brushed it off saying that it was just psychological and my cousin is probably crazy and is seeing a doctor for that. Moving forward, my sister becomes convinced though that she is possessed by a spirit. She tells me that the spirit tells her things to help her, warn her about things and guide her. She starts not eating as much as she was and starts avoiding the bath. And after a while, the whole room starts smelling like rotten flesh. I would push her into the bathroom and force her to take a bath every week or so and deep clean the room every week, moving furniture, scrubbing walls, and the smell was only getting worse, and it was mostly coming from her side of the room. I was convinced that her hormones and the lack of showers were the reasons, so I was making sure to shove her into the bathroom at least twice a week at this point, deep clean the room and provide all kind of deodorants and perfumes to her. The smell, though, was getting worse, and her behavior was getting worse too. Weirdly enough, too, she would know when my father would come home exactly by the minute. She would know as if it was a pop quiz. She would know where someone was going and why, and she would be able to talk pretty much anyone into doing whatever she wanted. There were a lot of weird things too, like she would always wake up tired, having the deepest black eyes and a lot of bruises as well. We ran all kind of blood work on her to fix it, but it all came back normal. She would find dead rats in her purse and other weird things too. So now to the experience. That night my sister, my little sister, aged 5 at the time, came to sleep with us in our room, and I was in the living room studying until really late. By 2 a.m. or so, I decided to go to sleep, and I just had this weird feeling that I should avoid my room and that I should just stay away, but I brushed it off. I went to my room, and when I opened the door, it smelled horrible, like something had died in there, and there was no air, like it was hard to breathe. I opened the window to let some air in, but I felt no change. I stuck my nose in the window to breathe some fresh air, but there really was none. I decided to sleep anyway, and my body was screaming at me to leave the room. I grabbed my pillow and was going to the living room, and then I thought, no, spirits and ghosts are not real. This is all my little sister being terrified. The smell must be from the furniture being damp, and we just need to replace it and just figure it out in the morning. So in the end, I turned around and I stayed. I felt the air become very heavy when I laid down. I moved, and all of a sudden, it's hard to explain, but I felt like my hands were not mine. So I touched my body, and I felt as if something or someone else was touching me. It was freaky, and I opened my eyes, and it was then that I saw this giant black figure standing right at the end of my bed. It was so big and so black, like no light could be shed on it. I blinked and it didn't go away. I was like, okay, I'm very tired from not sleeping enough. This must all be in my head. So I turned my back to it and I tried to get some sleep. Now, I was sleeping eventually when I transitioned into what I believe was a dream. I woke up and the demon was there, very black, and an evil feeling was coming out of it. I ran to wake my sister, but the demon blocked me. So I ran to the door to find my mother, and I knocked on her door until she opened. I told her about what was going on, and she didn't care, and the demon was coming after me, so I ran to the bathroom to hide. And there I saw a flame in the mirror, so I ran back to my room, but I couldn't open the door anymore, so I just kept banging on it until I forced it open. And then my night lamp exploded and I woke up. When I woke up, I was obviously terrified, but the room just didn't smell as bad as before, at least as bad as when I went to sleep. And there was more light in the room instead of the pitch black before. I didn't go back to sleep that night. I stayed awake all night until the morning when everybody woke up, and I noticed that my sister was barely walking. She said that she was extremely tired and was bruised more than usual. I also noticed that the room door wouldn't close anymore. It had moved horizontally and somehow it didn't fit the door frame anymore or something, and nobody knows why. My lamp, it had actually exploded, and my curtains were on the floor, and I noticed that they were pulled from the wall as if somebody had used a hammer to knock the hanging rods off. It was very weird, but I kept saying to myself that everything must have an explanation, until I went to have my breakfast. My 5-year-old sister said that she saw me and said, "Hey sis, there was a fairy just messing with your tummy and playing with it like with Play-Doh." I asked what fairy and what she meant, and she said, "The flying black fairy. He is a fairy because he can fly." I asked her to describe the fairy, and she said that it was scary, so when she saw it, she just closed her eyes and started praying to God. More things happened afterward, like knocking on the walls, someone choking my mother for a few seconds. She was speaking about it randomly at dinner. My sister got even weirder until I moved out. I heard that my cousin, who was diagnosed schizophrenic at the age of 19, actually had a religious exorcism performed on her, and that afterward she wasn't seeing anything weird or talking to any invisible beings anymore. Her psychiatrist couldn't keep her on medication and said that she was spontaneously cured from schizophrenia afterward, after less than 2 years of being diagnosed. My cousin reached out to my sister and took her to the same exorcist, and now she's also fine too. The smell left the house, and we just never really talked about what happened. The house was blessed, and that was it. Like I said, we're not a religious family by any means, but it was like trying everything just for the sake of it, and I'm still a bit of an agnostic, I admit, but the experience definitely changed and shaped me. My mother talked about things that she experienced in that house too, but We never shared our experiences with her because, to be honest, I just don't think that she would believe us. Anyway, I would love to get your thoughts on what you think it was. Was it demonic? Was it a ghost? Was it nothing at all, and was it all in our heads? I would really like to get your opinions. This happened when I was a kid, and I double-checked the story with my family just to make sure that I have the details correct. This was in the mid-80s. I was about 7, at home with my 2 older sisters, 8 and 11-ish, and 2 cousins, 7 and 8-ish, all 5 girls. My sister, 11, was in charge of babysitting us 4 younger girls. You have to have the picture of what our house looked like to understand what happened, too. It was a 2-story box house with a flat roof and a small box front porch, also with a flat roof. I can't remember what we were doing, but we were all in the house and we just kept hearing noises coming from the roof, like walking and what sounded like rocks being dropped down from the downspouts or something. And you know kids, right? We thought of a squirrel or something, but it just kept happening. Then my older sister said something about how maybe somebody climbed the huge tree beside the house and got on the roof. We were all scared because we knew that there was roof access, a point in the bedroom that I shared with one of my sisters, and what if he could get inside? My older sister told my other sister and one of my other cousins to walk across the street to the corner store, across an empty gravel parking lot, and on the way back look up and see if they could see someone on the roof. So the girls, both 8 years old, walk about halfway across the parking lot and, being curious kids, turned around, looked up, and saw a guy in one of those totally 80s sort of crop top football jerseys. Think Johnny Depp in Nightmare on Elm Street. And he was crouched down on the roof just staring. The girls came running home freaking out and told my older sister about the guy. My older sister, freaking out too, first went to the neighbor's house to use their deck to see if she could see on the roof, but couldn't see anything. She came home and then called the police. It felt like it took them ages to show up, but when they got there, I don't think that they believed a word that we said. They thought a bunch of little kids were making up this story for attention, but one cop drove down the road, up a hill about a block away, to see if they could see anything, but the way the roof was, you couldn't really see a person if they were laying down. Then these cops tell us kids that we had to go upstairs and check everywhere to see if we found anyone. 5 little girls from ages 7 to 11 sent upstairs, scared out of our minds, crying to look for this guy, knowing about the roof access. We all cried, not wanting to go, but they said that we had to. To this day, I remember how scared I was. I remember looking, but how well do little kids look, right? The cops didn't listen to us, didn't even check out the house, inside or out, and left. We were so scared to be left home with this guy out there. I mean, who knows where he was at this point. We didn't know if he was laying down on the roof or jumped down or somehow got in and was hiding. My mum finally got home a few hours later and we told her what happened immediately, and my mum explained to us that there was a lock on the roof access and that nobody could get in, but she checked anyways. She went out to check on the outside roof, and there were clear footprints in the dirt, dug in good from him jumping off the roof onto the porch and off into the flower bed. My mum was absolutely steaming mad when she realized that we had told the truth and weren't believed by the police. We went to the police station the next day and we were all separated and interviewed. We all told the same story. My mum went up one side of the cops and down the other, and we never found out who the guy was or why he was there. Did he know that it was a house with 5 little girls home alone? I'm not sure, but it's definitely freaky to think about. I'm currently 33, a male, and my first experience that I had in this place was I was 13 and my grandparents on my dad's side of the family mowing. My grandpa had quite a large shed that he woodworked in, and had recently put in a massive window facing the house. The window itself was around maybe 3 foot wide and 7 foot tall. As I'm mowing the grass, sometime in the afternoon, I see a tall, slender female from the floor to just the top of the window. She was all white and had the darkest eyes that I'd ever seen. No eyeballs, it seemed. The whole area where her eyes would be were just black. I stopped and we looked at each other, I think, for maybe a solid 3 to 5 seconds. I blink and she's gone. The second thing that happened was when I was 15. I opted for a futon instead of a normal mattress around the age of 12, so handrails and all this thing laid out bed style is maybe, I don't know, like 1.5 to 2 foot tall. I turned everything off and I laid down for bed. Maybe 5 minutes later, I hear what sounds like something flicking random things from one end of the room to the other. At the time, I had an old 24-inch box-style TV. The last flick sounded like it was dead center of the screen. Anyone older will know that it's a very distinct sound when something hits the glass on the older TV like that. I heard the flick to the screen and my dark room all of a sudden lit up with static from the TV. Whatever it was, it had managed to turn the TV on with the flick. I uncovered, turned the TV off again, and I went to sleep. Now, maybe a couple of weeks after the prior experience, I wake up to a light in my room, and at the time, and I still do, I slept in a really blacked out room. No lights, and I used thick plastic shower curtains on my windows to keep the light out. But clearly, there shouldn't be any light, so I uncover to see what's on. And there is a kid. I say kid because of my futon dimensions, and he is just like the old woman. All white, black eyes, and standing maybe 1 foot taller than my handrail at the end of my bed by my feet. We stare at each other for what felt like a solid minute, and then he slowly faded away and it was dark again in my room. My grandma on my dad's side was always very spiritual, had sage and such hung on walls. I talked to her about said experiences, and I don't know if she was just trying to calm me down about it or what, but she told me that white spirits are good spirits. I should avoid them, but I shouldn't be scared. She had since split up with my grandpa and was living on her own. So the next experience, I'm 16, staying the night at my grandma's. It was later in the evening, so 10 to 12-ish. We had both gone to bed before this. I wake up hearing snoring from the end of the hall. She was asleep and I had to use the restroom. As I'm walking down the hall, I pass the spare room and the same woman from Experience 1 is sitting on the end of the bed, head turned, staring at me. The whole room was lit up too. Now, I looked over my left. I saw said apparition and freaked. But that room was supposed to be empty, and I wasn't expecting to be looking at anything in there. I ran, of course, maybe 5 foot down the hall, then sort of backpedaled, took a look, and by then she was gone. I did not and have not told my grandma about this woman. I believe that whoever she is perhaps watching over her or something, guarding my grandma. Same as before, there were no bad vibes, but being scared was from not expecting it, I guess. But then there was the next experience. Other than random noises and yells of my name over the years, nothing really significant has happened. I'm now 27, married with kids and working night shifts. My family had gone to sleep at around 9:30 to 10. At about 1 or 2 in the morning, I'm doing laundry, when suddenly there is a loud scratching and beating in the door to the laundry room. I got up to investigate, but there was nothing amiss. I left the door open just in case. I walked back to the couch and sat down. Not even seconds later, the door just absolutely slams shut, and the beating on it continues. I've told my wife of all the noises and experiences beforehand, and she said that she had never had anything happen to her, so I assume that I'm the only one hearing this, and checked how much time was left on the dryer, set an alarm, and I just left the house. Yeah, I'm that guy. Me and my wife joke about it nowadays, but yeah, we have since bought a house and gotten a dog, and I've become accustomed to hearing noises and looking at the dog to see if she acknowledged it as well. Sometimes no, but most of the time she will completely perk up. Ears, hair on end, and whole 9 yards in whatever direction said noise came from. We have a spare room that nobody goes in. Absolutely creepy vibes from all family members involved. Even the guests have said that they can't sleep in there, and have moved to the couch in the middle of the night. Only when I'm home alone do I hear the noises. But on a couple of occasions, I hear what sounds like a 5-year-old girl laughing from our kitchen. The dog has acknowledged this both times as well, and that always has made me feel really weird. Now, here is how I came to the solution to my problem with my house. It was during a family visit at Easter or something at my mum's. I went to my old room, shut the door, and I spoke out loud. I said, "Hey ghost kid, if you're still here, I could use your help at my house. You've never given me feelings of harm, and my house currently does. If you're still here, could you come with me and do your best?" It's been 2 years. Occasionally, I feel a bit of a catch of a glimpse of a kid ghost from my youth in the very corner of my eye, like peeking around a corner of something. But all noises, laughter, and all the bad vibes have since left. That's all of my experiences up until this day, and I just wanted to share it and get it off my chest. Maybe somebody else has encountered a white ghost with black holes where their eyes should be like I have. I don't know, but I sound crazy, I know that, but I swear that all of this is the truth. When I was a teenager in the early 2000s, South London, there was a rumor in my high school that there was a naked man who looked like Father Christmas in the woods. We thought the story was funny and enjoyed it, but all secretly understood it to be an urban legend. Now, one day after school, me and my friends would go to the park about 5 minutes away from the school to play on the tire swing and make daisy chains, talk about boys and stuff. The park was on a seam of ancient woods, and it was more or less a rectangular shape with a large rectangular grass green in the middle surrounded by woodland on 3 sides. The grassy green had a children's playground on the right-hand side, butting up to the woodland on one side. The children's playground was large with an assortment of equipment for both younger and older children, and was gated off from the rest of the park by 2-meter-high metal railings. One summer's evening after school, though, we were hanging out in the children's park by the tire swing, as we usually did, when I noticed an unusual movement in the trees that bordered the other side of the metal railing. All I could see was a mixture of green and brown tones amidst the shadows of the in the woodland area, so I approached the metal railings of the children's park to get a better view. Now, the woodland had a kind of opening in it, at the center of which stood a large oak tree. Dappled light filtered through the canopy to the foot of the oak tree, forming a sort of natural stage before the audience of the children's playground. As my eyes began to focus, I realized that right in the middle of the stage was a young man, maybe about 30 years old, stood staring at us, a group of 3 teenage girls in their school uniforms. Our eyes transfixed for a moment before I looked down and screamed. My eyes locked on him in terror, but he did not avert his gaze. He stood there, watching us, while completely naked, playing with himself. My friends ran over to my side and followed my eye line. Horrified, they grabbed me, pulled me out of my shock and out of the park, and we ran home. This was just before the time when mobile phones were ubiquitous, so we didn't tell the police, and that was pretty much the end of the matter. But 20 years later, I always wonder if that man went on to do anything worse. There was another incident that happened a little while later, but I don't know if it was connected, but it was much, much worse than what we experienced. I personally really did not want to talk about this at first, because I've always thought people sound so crazy when they claim that they've seen ghosts. The more I experience too, the crazier I feel. I've been trying to rationalize things, but I've never dealt with anything like this before. So, I work in a large storeroom, main in a hospital from late evening until around 6 a.m. This supply room is located somewhere above the old morgue, of which the entrance has been bricked over. Not really relevant, but this kind of is crazy to me since I didn't have any experiences until I was made aware of this. I definitely don't seek things out or jump at every little thing. I actually wear earbuds and crank the volume to pretend that nothing is happening. But I will hear things fall, look and see that nothing actually fell off the shelves. And after my friends and security told me about the morgue, the lights would flicker in my department infrequently. I rationalized that this must be old wiring. When I made a supply delivery to the postpartum floor, the lights flickered once. This is in a wing very recently built. It is the only small supply room that I deliver to that I am almost always completely alone in while putting away supplies. Then at about maybe 3.5, 4 weeks ago, the lights flickered very hard in the main storeroom. As this happened, my phone screen flickered at the same time, and about a week later at maybe 2 a.m., I was holding paper up looking at items that I needed to pull for an order. And by the edge of the paper, across from the road that I was in, I swear to you that I saw a black face with white eyes peeking at me from around a shelf. It had a hand wrapped around the pole of the shelf, no different from a child peeking around a doorframe. When I cut my eyes over to get a better look, what I saw didn't vanish too. It more so pulled away, I guess, like it slipped back around the shelf. I rationalized and told myself that I must just be tired. In reality, I didn't feel tired at all though. Last night, I know almost the exact same time too, because I was so terrified I actually called my mum immediately. At about 1 a.m., I was pulling my last order for the night, ER, and I had just a few items left. Loudly, I heard supply items fall off the shelving on a different row. I ignored it and continued listening to a podcast, telling myself that if I didn't give it any attention that it will stop. After about 5 or 6 minutes, I was sitting down logging changes to my order, and I heard supplies fall from another row, this time louder than the first. I wanted to play it off, but my heart was racing at this point, so I called my mum and told her, "Hey, were you asleep? You're going to have to stay on the phone with me for at least a few minutes." This is at 1:09 in the morning. I didn't want to say out loud what was going on, but she picked up on it from my mentioning that it was from a week before. I told her that I was going to start making my deliveries to the floors, so once I got out of the storeroom, I would leave her alone so that she could sleep. I'm not religious, but she told me that I needed to pray when these things are happening. She asked if I was in a safe place, and I told her that I should be okay. I was taking my delivery to NICU and postpartum. I let her go as I felt that I would be fine. The delivery to the NICUs was pretty much as usual, but as soon as I took my cart into the postpartum supply room, I didn't even get to put one item away before the lights began flickering harder than I'd ever seen. I flew into a panic and immediately left the room to catch my breath. I've tried to ask the nurses at the station if they ever experienced the lights flickering in that room, but they just looked at me like I was crazy. I tell myself that this stuff isn't real or just explain it away, but I don't know. Am I crazy? If this is real, what could I be dealing with? What should I do? I've never seen or experienced anything like this in my life until now. And to be honest, I'm just a bit lost. For the last few months, I've been hearing noises and yelling at my house. The first incident happened when I was cleaning the kitchen. I heard my nickname called loudly in my dad's voice. My parents' room is a clear earshot away. I could look around a corner and see their bed. Sometimes he naps during the day, he works nights, but I knew for a fact that he wasn't home at that time. I still went to check anyway, and his bed was empty. No cars in the driveway, and it really freaked me out, but I just went about my day. The other few have all been very similar too. It's always my parents calling me, either at night when I'm alone or during the day when everybody is out. And the odd thing about it is that, while it sounds just like them, the nickname that is used isn't what they call me. It's what I'm known as by a bunch of other people outside my immediate family. It already creeps me out that I'm hearing my name called randomly, but the fact that it's not the right name is just creepy, right? This morning, too, I woke up to my name being shouted right in my ear, my full name, which, again, is rare for either of my parents to use. It was my dad's voice, and he sounded really angry. My immediate reaction was to jump up, but my door was closed, and again, I was home alone. Last night, I thought that I heard my 8-year-old brother screaming, but I checked on him, and he was fast asleep. My parents have confirmed that they hear us calling them too, but it's always a bit off as well. My brother just calls them Mum or Ma and Dad, and I rarely call them that, and always use a nickname for each. The amount of times that my mum has come to my room wondering why I'm yelling for her when I'm doing homework is crazy. My dad said that when I went on vacation for a week that they heard me talking in my room, but it was always sort of unintelligible. Except I was 500 miles away, so that just doesn't make any sense. The most frustrating part about all of this, though, isn't the name calling. The most frustrating part about this, though, isn't even the name calling. It's the fact that talking about this stuff gives me migraines. I never acknowledge it when it happens or speak to whatever might be doing it, but if you don't physically go to check what you heard, then you just get these terrible headaches. It's like whatever it is begging for attention by impersonating us or something. It's something like I've never experienced, and I just wish that it would stop. This is a long camping story, told by someone who doesn't speak English, so please just bear that in mind as you listen in. Romania is a country where people might get kidnapped, murdered, disappear, and such. My parents were legitimately afraid for me, and were against the idea of going camping. I had to lie to them that we would stay in a hotel near the Kazaya National Park, so that they would get off my back. Obviously, that's not what we did though. Long story short, we had to travel from Bucharest to this park, which is around 200 kilometers in maybe 2 hours by train. We get our immense backpacks, everything that we needed, and we went our way. Nothing specifically happened in the train, except for the fact that the train was overly crowded, with the exception of our train compartment being completely empty. That is extremely rare for Romanian trains. I got excited though, thinking that we would have that whole compartment to ourselves. As I said, it's a very rare thing to happen. And of course, after maybe 10 to 20 minutes, it was occupied by a man entering our compartment, accompanied by a beautiful German shepherd. I love all kinds of animals, cats, dogs in particular though. I usually find my way around all animals too, even those that really don't like people. But not this dog. This dog was otherworldly. He looked so stuffed, as if it was a stuffed animal almost. He would listen to his owner's every single command. I was impressed by this, so obviously I started asking the man about his dog, since it would be a long and awkward trip to just sit there in complete silence. The man was exactly like his dog though, except the commands that he would give to his dog. No other contribution to the conversation, really. He told me that his dog's name is Uchigashul, which in Romanian means the killer. It's a very weird name to give a dog because for this particular example, we would use the English word as it is, not translate to the word Romanian, and name the dog like that. But I thought to myself, well, each to their own. I asked him why such a scary name, and he bluntly replied, the dog is trained to kill. It's the only thing that he likes, and he's good at it. Now, I personally consider that the dog will grow up to have a similar personality to an owner, and most of the times, I would judge people with dogs on how that animal reacts to the world and to his owner. And let me tell you guys, these two did not give a good vibe in return. I brushed everything over, thinking to myself that maybe this guy is training his dog to hunt in the woods or something. When I started thinking which woods are legal to hunt in our country, while I was thinking of that, the guy, out of nowhere, asks if we're traveling to the national park. That was surprisingly accurate too. I mean, he gave the name of it. Considering too that the only time that we mentioned the place was in the train station long before we found our seats, and way longer before we even met this guy. Again, I thought it was nothing because in my country, people who happen to go in the same direction will try to make small talk and guess where you're headed. Of course, you can lie to keep your destination safe, or you can be honest if you like. I took the honesty route, and am judging myself for that to this day. My advice, never be too honest with strangers, or perhaps even honest at all, after you hear this. So we confirmed that we were going to that place, asked what else to see around, since he started talking about the area, and well, considering that we really knew nothing about the place, we took it all in. He told us about the woods, the vegetation, the animals that we can encounter there, told us about a beautiful monastery right at the bottom of the mountain that we needed to climb to get to, advised us to visit the Shore waterfall and explore the caves behind it, and try out the local restaurant too. When this guy started talking about the wilderness and nature, his eyes glowed as if he was experiencing a pleasant memory, but he also grabbed his dog's collar from the neck. Squeezing it tight, the collar made a loud clink sound. And what surprised me was that the dog made no move, no whimper, no twitch, nothing. Just like a stuffed animal. Anyway, we reach our destination, say our goodbyes, the man waves at us, and we face against him to go on our way. I turned back around the right way because I wanted to ask where exactly that restaurant was, and the man and the dog were no longer there. But not just that, also his luggage was gone. That creeped me out a bit, but I mean, who cares, right? He must have just left. We were too thrilled as well for our first camping experience, so we started walking with our backpacks on us, 10 kilos each, and we reach a tunnel digging into the mountain. It looked amazing too, exactly like those horror movie tunnels which, if you traveled during the night, would make your hair stand right up. Lucky for us, we traveled during daytime. It wasn't a long tunnel by any means too. I mean, we could see the end by the time that we got to the middle of it. But it was around this time that we hear a whimper in the distance. It sounded like a dog crying in desperation for its life, so we stop. My boyfriend looks at me with his, "Oh no, you're not going to take that dog with us" type of face, and tries to convince me to take a different route. We don't. I hear the dog. I go right towards the sound, and in the middle of the road I see a chubby puppy with lots of white and brown circles on its butt, crying so hard and laying on the cement looking really hurt, as if it was hit by a car or something. I freeze and think to myself that, oh no, our trip is over at this point. I have to save this dog. We call for him. He looks at us, pointy ears up, gets up and looks like a doofus, starts running desperately to us. He was alone and afraid. We called him Rudolph, and now he was pretty much our camping buddy. Like 1 kilometer further, we find another puppy though, probably his sister, which we dragged from the nearby river. someone threw her in the river to try and kill her, we guess, all wet and cold and hungry, and of course we take her too. So here we are, 10-kilo backpacks each, 2 puppies at my chest, boyfriend with map, trying to find a spot to camp for the first night. We passed by the monastery the man in the train mentioned, but because we had these 2 puppies, we really couldn't enter the inside building. The priest wouldn't allow us anyway, so we just sort of walked around the property, through the gardens, until we reached the base of the mountain that we had to climb. I would like to mention too that these puppies were 2 tiny little brats, because the second that you would put them down and force them to walk on their own, they would slam their butts on the ground and just begin crying. Just a lot of drama really, but we walk and walk and walk until we decided to stop because it was getting late. I was also beginning to get a bit cold, so we found a spot next to a small landmark type of cottage in the middle of the wood. We called it Troyanitsa. It's like a scouting post, but for the church, where they place religious icons or a Bible, stuff like that, inside to bring good energy to the area. It belongs to the church. It wasn't like a house or anything. It was basically a roof with 4 small walls and an opening, not a door. But you could go into it, like hide from the rain and whatnot. There was an icon inside, and a Bible with pages ripped from it. Curious as I am, I opened the Bible, was really annoyed to see that people would write down their names in it, like couples do on trees. But on one particular page, the words, "I will find you," stuck out. It was written in red ink. Again, I thought to myself that it was probably somebody who wanted to scare travelers with silly messages, so I put the book back and gave it no second thought. We put up the tent, make the fire, unpack, make food, and we eat. We also feed the puppies, which are now cuddled up in our tent, and finally darkness starts to rise all around us. My boyfriend always kept the fire up every hour because when it went off, it felt as if all the sounds in the woods were louder and closer to us, which was probably not the case, but anyway, that's what we did. So now, it's around 12 a.m. We are all in the tent cuddling to keep warm. The puppies wake up and they start crying. I get up and I unzip the tent and put them out to pee. They do, and then I get them back in. They cry some more, and the smallest one starts shivering. At the same time, though, I then begin to hear grunting from behind our tent. My boyfriend is up too because he hears this as well. The fire is fading at this point, and the moment that he unzips the tent, the steps stop. The sound just disappears, and then it sounds like somebody has run into the woods. It almost sounded like a snake, though, slithering through the fallen leaves on the ground, but at unimaginable speed. I ask him, was that a snake? And he says that, up to this day, he cannot explain what he saw. He says that it was a sort of slithery figure with feet that made a snort-like sound when the light hit it. The puppies, they calm back down after this creature, whatever it was, runs into the woods. We try to go back to sleep after we reignite the fire. It's like 3 a.m. this time when we wake up and the puppy's being fussy again. The fire is nearly dead. We clearly had no idea how to put up a sustaining fire, by the way. My boyfriend gets up to search for firewood and I get out as well. I stare into the darkness and I swear to this day that I hear whispers coming from between the trees. I look up at the sky, considering that it's like 3 a.m., and hear birds being really loud and fluttering their wings. Now, I'm no expert in birds by any means, but don't they usually sleep around this time? Well, whatever the case, these were not. They were very active, very vocal, and seemed almost very frustrated. I look at the fire and I follow the red sparks popping out of it into the sky and become fascinated with something. The sparks, they don't seem to die off. They just go on, changing color from like a hellish red to a sort of green color. This was very out of the ordinary because it created sort of an illusion, which is hard to explain, but It looked as if the sparks were going into the woods, creating a sort of track for me. I kept looking after each spark to see when it would burn out. None of them did. Instead, they just seemed to sort of levitate, turn green, and flow into the woods. It was around this moment, too, that I began to get goosebumps on my skin. The birds, they were agitated. The mysterious light was pointing us to go deeper into the woods, and all the trees around us seemed to all of a sudden have eyes on them. Like the trunks had a distinguishable shape that looked like eyes. I know that at this point I was probably just overthinking it. I mean, it was nothing paranormal since someone explained that those shapes come from tree branches which are sort of ripped off and sort of create a swirl on the bark, and that's the shape that is left afterward. But there were so many, like 100 eyes, all looking at the exact spot where we decided to camp, having only that religious tiny landmark to mentally protect me now. And as I inspected my surroundings, I hear movement in one of the bushes in front of our tent, like 10 meters away from us. Obviously, I stand my ground, but I don't get near it. Suddenly, though, a dark, bent-over silhouette comes out of it, and half inside the bush and sort of half outside of it, stares at us. I call my boyfriend, and we're both like, what the heck is that? Is it a bear cub? A wolf? A pig? The creature, whatever it was, shakes its head the same way that a dog does after a bath, and I hear a distinguishing clink, like a dog collar. At this point, my boyfriend manages to light up the fire really big, which scares whatever this is back to run into the woods, through the bushes from which it initially came out. That calms us down a bit, but not enough to ever close our eyes again before that night. We just stayed up and we went back into the tent. My boyfriend eventually fell asleep though. The puppies are also sound asleep, but I couldn't. I kept the zipper on the tent opened a little, just enough to make my eye peek through it, right at the early mentioned bush. I think I must have spent a solid hour staring at that bush. All of a sudden, I hear a noise coming from that direction, and I immediately wake up my boyfriend, who is now peeking through the hole with me into complete darkness. And what we see next, it still disturbs me. From that exact same bush, we see a human head popping out and looking towards our tent. Note too that our peeping hole was small enough to not make it look like you're being watched from the inside of the tent. And this head is slowly arising out of the bush. The skin so white that we honestly thought that it was a ghost at first. After that, a shoulder, another shoulder, a full torso, a leg, and bit by bit an entire man emerges from the bush, completely naked, lit up by both the moon and our fire. And what he did next was so terrifying. He comes really close to our tent and begins to remove branches and rocks, etc. from our fire, basically trying to extinguish our fire by dismantling it. This all happened like maybe 2 to 3 meters from our tent. And it was at this point that I look at the man with horror because I recognize him. And now that I think about it, the clink that I heard earlier sounded a lot like the one that I heard on the train that day. It was the same man from the train, with his dog too. I don't know if he followed us, I don't know if he just went the same route as us, and found us and decided to stalk us. But this guy had been there since 12 a.m. at least, because our fire would be dead every 2 to 3 hours, and we would be woken up by the sound of branches being cracked, rocks being moved, which we internally explained as animals crossing the land. After he successfully managed to put out our fire, he slowly crept back into the bush, submerging into it bit by bit, until only his head would be out of it, with a disfigured look on his mouth, looking like a moaning ghost almost. And you can bet that we did not get a wink of sleep after that. We really didn't know what to do at this point, but to just go back out and try to reignite the fire, light ourselves some torches, and stay near the campfire until the first rays of the sun came up. I was too afraid to go near that distant bush, I didn't need any answers, and I did not need any explanations. I just wanted daylight to get the heck out of there as quickly as we could. And as soon as daylight broke, we did. We packed our stuff and we got the heck out of there. We had planned a 4-day camping trip, and this experience made us give up after the first night. It was just a risk that we didn't intend to take. If that guy had followed us, or even if it was just a coincidence, it was enough to ruin everything. As a conclusion to my story, and I guess a bit of advice to any first-time campers out there, please just be careful about who you tell your location out there to, or even areas remotely close to your destination, especially in regards to strangers. We just don't know where their minds might take them and what they may end up doing. Always stay safe, always be aware of your surroundings and any changes that come to you under the form of sounds, movements, temperatures, and so on. And obviously, always protect yourself. I was in my first semester of university. I had just graduated college not too long ago and had entered into a program that, after a while, I would come to resent. During that time, with adjusting and taking daily transit an hour and a half away from where I grew up into the large city in order to study what was somewhat of a new adventure to me. In a lot of ways, I was just beginning to sprout as my own individual and trying to carve a path for my life while simultaneously opening myself up to new experiences and a new environment. I have longtime friends who go to the same facility as me, but at that time, our schedules just wouldn't always line up. This meant that a lot of my days were spent traveling back and forth and just walking around the city alone. I really wanted to try and expand my horizon of experiences, though, and friends during this period. In a lot of ways, I was really desiring to find a good community on campus that could help satiate my boredom and loneliness, I guess. I can be extremely extroverted, but sometimes I find that it takes a lot out of me to try and actually pursue and maintain friendships that haven't been established years prior. I've made friends before, don't get me wrong, from different classes in college, but ultimately, and I know this makes me a bit of a turd, but I would end up texting less and less until eventually either side would end up ghosting one or the other. Because I'm a busy guy too, I really just don't find myself prioritizing people who I feel like aren't as important to me as others. I know, it's probably a terrible thing to say, but nonetheless, it's the truth. One day, however, I met Joel. I was on the phone with my fiancée, and I distinctly remember exactly how it all went down. As I was walking out of the school Starbucks with a decaf coffee, I had one headphone in and I was heading to class through a small stretch of underground passageways under the street that connects to the school's library. It's a building to the actual building that possesses classes. And as I was hastily making my way, I saw this short and stout guy, looking roughly my age at the time, 21, with a thick brown beard and a hat on. Our eyes met, and as I was about to simply walk past, he asked me something in a very charismatic and calm tone. "Hey, sorry to bother you. You look like a pretty busy guy, but I was wondering, do you mind doing a survey about religion? It's one for my classes." To this, I regret answering and wish that I had simply continued walking, but at the time, I was becoming more and more compelled by the notion of formal religious institutions and questioning my own religious faith, particularly leaning towards Christianity. "Sure," I replied cordially. He then introduced himself as Joel, and after we went through a small survey pertaining to religious affiliations and perspectives on religions, Joel informed me that a small group of students like myself were planning on getting together as a group and discussing various religions in order to gather new insights and to create a bit of a community. Of course, with the prospect of finding some new friends on campus and also exploring my own spiritual perspectives, I gave him my phone number after he asked for it, and he said that he would contact me in the next following days. Upon entering our first meeting, I sat down in a very crowded place with seats at our school facility, and was greeted by Joel, alongside a bunch of other members. They introduced themselves to me and vice versa. They were all extremely kind to me. We began our small group meeting, and I was a bit shocked to find out that the sole topic that we were discussing was Christianity. I wasn't aware that we were only going to be discussing Christianity, which was against what he had proposed this group to constitute upon our meeting in the tunnel with. That being said, though, I was still curious enough to continue, and I was accompanied by 3 other young guys of my age who, after a bit of talking, I found out that we had a lot of similar interests. Joel, who now presented himself as a leader of our study group, relayed how we would be analyzing Christianity through a multiple-step program designed to unveil the holy power associated with the religion to us. Since I was curious and wanted to learn more about the religion as well as having made some new friends, I continued to attend this study group for the rest of the semester, in which there were a few circumstances where I questioned Joel's interpretations and was met with hard resistance. It felt like at times my wavering belief in what Joel was saying would be met with straight dismissal as opposed to actual conversation. I continued to brush that off though as the group that I was working with got closer. The school's club, which I was now a part of, provided me with exactly what I wanted. We even went to a church-run event together where I quit vaping, and many individuals reported mystical experiences. Things only started to get concerning with Joel during our one-on-one conversations. I discussed my personal experiences and belief in my newfound religious beliefs, and all of my former spiritual experiences as well, and Joel exposed to me a story and a few incidences that, at that time, I certainly should have taken as red flags. For example, when he was younger, he had gone on a retreat where, when he was in prayer, he said that he began to hear the voice of God talk to him. I questioned at first if he was referring to the voice of God as more so of a metaphor or something, but he had reassured me that he literally heard God speak to him before. When he told me this, I became a bit unnerved, I'll admit. At the helm of this community was Joel, but in all other senses, I was satisfied with who I was with and what we were doing together. Though I am not entirely dismissive of strange occurrences, I suppose, especially pertaining to spirituality, his experience talking with God in his head came off as uncomfortable to me. He also said that the way that he would pray would involve a direct conversation and reply with God. Out of discomfort, I wouldn't prod him on what he meant by this. This, of course, though, was just the beginning. So after the summer had ended, I had found myself in the most religiously devoted state that I had ever been in. Throughout the summer, I had had a treacherous injury which made me housebound for months, and I had to call upon God in a lot of ways for strength. With my newfound devotion, I was elated to fall back into the community that I had nurtured and grown with throughout the last semester, relating to something that I had found deep joy in. At the first lesson of the semester, something was very different though. Joel, as before, was at the helm of our study session, but was now perpetually interrupted by people coming to greet him and give him praise. It was so bad that we literally essentially sat and watched for 20 minutes before we can get on with our lesson, as more than 10 people, mostly young men of our age, came to greet this man. As aforementioned, when not unnerving, he was extremely charming and gave the impression that he cared deeply for everyone. Once our lesson began, he introduced us to the second phase of the program. He explained that this was one of the toughest programs of the different levels that there was, as it required even more devotion and, more importantly, an emphasis on sacrifice for those who engaged. He showed us a diagram of a small stick person and showed that in this program we would have to accept Jesus as the center of our life. He explained that by making our lives surround Jesus entirely, that we would not be losing something but be gaining. He also began to go over the notion that sex before marriage is a sin, and that if we were to continue with this program, that we would have to make the sacrifice of giving up sex in our relationships and prove that we weren't. He said that many guys weren't able to continue because of it, and I talked about this afterwards with one of the members of this group, who, not unlike me, had been in a serious relationship with someone they loved for years. In my personal opinion, though we weren't married on the altar, I knew that both me and this other member felt devoted to our partners as if we were already married in a sense, and we both expressed how Joel's behavior surrounding this was sort of off-putting, controlling, and a bit intrusive. But after our lesson, I was a bit dumbfounded, I guess, by the intensity with which he gave his speech about this new program that we would be engaging in this semester. Joel and we sat down for a few more minutes and talked, in which I expressed experiences of devotion from the summer and explained my entire catastrophic experience with my injury. He then went on to tell me that, at times, he was actually able to know things beforehand. This seemingly random and strange statement, it really shocked me. He said, for example, he was able to know something another member had before they had even mentioned it, and in the way that he described it, it sounded as if he was saying that he had some sort of mystical foresight. I was a bit jarred, to say the least, though I felt like it was a bit impolite to question any further. Joel then went on to tell me that he believed that if I successfully completed this program, was primed to become a teacher for the first program that I had done the semester prior, leading others who would join, and that I had a bright future in the organization apparently. In that moment, with what he had laid down on us in the lesson, I felt overwhelmed by his expectations of me. It also became evident that Joel was not a student at our facility. In fact, he was in his mid-30s and even had kids. He was actually just a part of an organization that recruits people to become Christians and missionaries that work on our campus. This means that he actually lied to me when I had first met him. He wasn't a student. There was no group talking about various religions, and his whole purpose was to convert me to make me join the organization that he was a part of. In any case, it was at this point that school began to pick up a lot, and I was also working part-time to help support myself. As I was on the train to head back home the next week, I had forgotten that my second lesson of the program that semester was supposed to happen, so I texted Joel saying, "Hey man, I actually got onto the train and forgot about our lesson. Sorry about that, dude. I'm not going to be able to make it. I also have work later, so yeah." To which he replied, "Can you get off the train? Try and get here as soon as possible." I was a bit dumbfounded by that question. Since I live an hour and a half away, it wasn't as easy as getting off the train and heading back the opposite direction, and he knew that too. He knew that the area that I lived in was pretty remote and a fair distance away. I also told him that I had work, which he had plainly disregarded. So, "No man, unfortunately I can't come. Have a good lesson," I replied. To which he said, "Come on man, just get off the train and come back." At this point, I was annoyed, I'll admit it. Not only did I feel like he was commanding me, but that he was also blatantly disregarding the fact that I said no, and that I had work that day. So, in the end, I just didn't answer him. I talked with my fiancé, though, about how I was starting to feel about the whole ordeal, and how I felt guilty about having feelings of wanting to distance myself from the group, while simultaneously not wanting to lose the community and friends that I had established along the way. My fiancé told me, though, that by the way that Joel was acting, and with regards to the things that he said, that she was starting to become uncomfortable with the whole situation too. I remember sitting in bed thinking about leaving the group, and how the prospect made me feel physically ill. After all, I had been given everything that I wanted in a community, except for the fact that at the helm was a seemingly increasingly controlling and persuasive being who was making me and possibly other members more miserable. I'll give you that one. But nevertheless, I was still a bit reluctant. Now, There was an event the following Friday that was going to be at the church, which was organized by the community. Originally, since many of my friends from this group were going, I did intend to go, but alas, I was scheduled by my boss to work that day, so there was no way that I was going to be able to attend. I knew that Joel would be insistent upon me coming anyways, so when Joel texted me reminding me that the event was on Friday, I told him that I wasn't able to go because I had work. To this, he replied and simply said, "What? Bro, no way, you've got to come. Take work off and find somebody else to take your shift. God wants you there." I was expected. He dismissed my decision and also said that I had to be there because God wanted me there, as if he was his mouthpiece or something. I went on to text him again and informed him, "Sorry man, I cannot do that. I just got a promotion and I have to be there. I hope you guys have a great time anyways." To which he then again replied similarly to what he had before, and this was my personal breaking point. He knew the importance of my financial situation, and his dismissal of my personal boundaries, as well as his attempt to command me, made me decide to text him explaining that I was done with the group and that I wanted to pursue my own religious exploration without the group from then on. I felt as if he was slowly but surely increasingly controlling me and trying to take what he could, commanding me as if he were the leader of my life in any way possible. It was even up to him whether or not I had sex with my fiancée. He replied with a long paragraph, persisting in this sort of overly kind manner that I had to continue with the group and that it was God's will for me to show up to this event, even though I was completely unable. He was certain, though, that this group was meant for me and that God had told him that this was where I was supposed to be. After I responded again telling him to stop and that I would not, he sent me another paragraph of similar length, repeating what he had just said. No matter what I would say, and whenever I would say no, he would overstep my boundaries while maintaining a kind and friendly tone in order to try and push me into submission when I had clearly said no. And at this point, I said to him that I did not want him to talk to me anymore, to which he replied, "Bro, why? Can we meet up? I want you to explain why you don't want to continue so that we can meet up and do that and I can get a better sense and we can figure out what we can do from there." Even in this, I knew that he was trying to elongate his chance at bringing me back into the group and continuing his reign of control. I said that I didn't want to, so he asked again, and I decided at that moment that I needed to block him, so I did. About a semester later, though, I was walking down the street of my school, and as I walked by a pizza parlor, lo and behold, who came out? Joel walked over to me with one of his friends and said that I was one of his friends to his buddy. I sort of uncomfortably stood there, and his friend went inside for a moment, while Joel turned around to look at me and asked with this sort of disarming gentleness, "Did you block me?" I replied yes. He then said, "You should unblock me, man. That way we can meet up and talk because I really want to know why you left the group." To which I evidently was frustrated, said okay, and went on my way. That night he texted me on Instagram insisting that we meet up again, and I just blocked him there too. In short though, I'm thankful for my fiancée, who is the love of my life. Without her, I'm really not sure if I would have been strong enough to have left that group and his control. The fact of the matter is that there were other guys in that group who had absolutely nobody. They had nothing, and they were prime targets for a charismatic and controlling freak. There were members of that group who were in higher levels, so to speak, who had done all the programs, and who seemed as if they were sort of emaciated. But they had become such restricted fundamentalists that their lives and their openness to new experiences were significantly thwarted. In the end, and after a lot of reflection, I truly believe that I was being indoctrinated into a cult. I don't know where it was going, I don't know what they had planned for the future, but it was most assuredly heading in that direction, and that is a frightening prospect. I guess the lesson here is, Beware of who you let into your life, and just because somebody might seem nice to you does not mean that they might not have ulterior motives. Also, learn to stand your ground and respect yourself. If you say no, then mean it. So my girlfriend's mother is a long-time heroin user and has been in and out of jail for my girlfriend's whole life pretty much. When she lived with her mother and her mother's husband, she witnessed physical abuse and drug activity. She was forced to move out at a very young age in order to stay alive, and she thought that her mother was finally clean when her mother announced her pregnancy. After getting over the initial shock, my girlfriend decided to be supportive of her mother since she thought that she was clean. That was until her mother overdosed while pregnant. She decided to cut all contact at that point. My girlfriend is also a mandated reporter, and last year reported her mother and her mother's husband to the States since she knew that it wasn't a safe situation for the baby. Unfortunately, the baby died, and I won't go into details about how it all happened, but it was horrible to say the least. My girlfriend's mother was arrested, and her husband was arrested for child endangerment and other charges very recently. And at first, the judge did not grant either of them bail. Eventually, her husband was granted bail, in which he posted. We didn't know this until recently, which helped us to put some of the pieces together. My girlfriend and I like to sit outside her house in the car and just sort of chat or listen to music sometimes. And recently, there have been black cars around my girlfriend's house. She also is frequently followed by black cars when she drives me home. It's the same couple of black cars that do this too. They're not just random ones. And at first, we thought that we were just being paranoid since everyone was still in jail, right? But when we found out that the husband was out of jail, we began to doubt our insanity. The first major thing happened after my girlfriend and I went on a dinner date. We got home after dark and sat in a car for about 45 minutes before we noticed the same black car passing by us every few minutes. After 10 minutes of that, a different car drove towards us, flicking its high beams on when it got close enough for us to see who was inside. It swerved into the oncoming lane, and I genuinely thought that it was going to hit the passenger side of the car. It sped away, and after that we ran inside. And after this, we started noticing the black cars more and more. For instance, this past Wednesday morning around 3 a.m.-ish, the same distinct black van that we had seen being pulled up outside of my house was there. This was weird too, because my girlfriend and I live about 30 minutes from each other in two separate cities. A man got out of the van and shined a flashlight through my yard, scanning it almost. He shined the flashlight up at the window that I was sitting at, kept it there for a second, then walked 30 feet to an empty driveway, scanned around there for 20 seconds before getting in the van and peeling away. The windows were ice-covered and frozen, so I couldn't make out the specifics of the van, but it was definitely strange. A few nights later, my girlfriend and I spent some time hanging out in the car when we spotted a black van hiding behind another parked car further up the street. We could only see one headlight, but it creeped by us as we sat in the car, and my girlfriend lives between two dead-end streets. Think of a very blocky U, I guess, but she lives between the two prongs, and the van went up the first dead end, 4 ways on, and sat for a few minutes before turning around and driving almost in the other lane of traffic to get close to us. It then went up the other dead end and stayed put. We thought that it was weird that the van didn't just back out of the first dead end, instead opting to drive all the way up the narrow street and turn around like that. After a few minutes, we call a friend and recount the story just to get an extra opinion. While my girlfriend was talking to our friend, I got out of the car to go for a cigarette and to see how far away the van was. I walked up the dead end that the van was on for about 15 feet before getting the worst gut feeling that I had ever gotten. Across the street from me was a black mass which was darker than the darkness around it. And at that, I decided to just turn around and rush my girlfriend into the house. Later that night, we heard a bang coming from downstairs, followed by what sounded like a boot on wooden stairs. We locked the bedroom door, and I sat against the door with a baseball bat, hopeful to barricade it. A few minutes later, We heard a car door slam before the sound of tires squealing and a car driving out of there. Our initial idea was maybe it came from the TV, but we had paused it, and the TV in the next room is never loud enough to feel real, I guess. When I went downstairs an hour later to get some water, there was nothing damaged or missing, though. We theorized that maybe it was the sound of the front door trying to be opened, even though it was deadbolted. My girlfriend's exterior wall doesn't face the road, and we've never heard car sounds before. It is, however, next to the private driveway, and sometimes we will hear her grandparents' car door close or the neighbors backing out or whatever. But the next day, I was shoveling the sidewalks at my girlfriend's house, an activity that took about 20 minutes, and I saw that same black Chevy Silverado with mud streaks on the tailgate. It circled the block about 4 times, and I was able to see the silhouette of a man driving through the passenger side window, and each time it's always been the same man and the same truck. My girlfriend lives in a small town too, and we've been able to catalogue the neighborhood cars pretty well. The black van and the truck are definitely abnormal. Our theory is that someone is trying to scare my girlfriend into not testifying, or flat out making sure that neither of us ever have the ability to testify. We really just need opinions at this stage. Are we just paranoid, or do you think that this is something that we should actually be worried about? Do you think that these are just weird coincidences, or is there something more going on? So, I need to provide a bit of backstory for this. When I was 11 or 12, I can't quite remember which age, but I moved away from my dad's house to live with my mum and stepdad. I'll spare you the details, but it was basically to escape a less than desirable situation. Anyway, my mum and her boyfriend at the time, who we'll call Elias, the name of a bad guy from one of my favorite shows, my stepdad looks exactly like him too, rented a house in a pretty sketchy neighborhood. It's all that they could afford at the time, and so, as a result, I went to a pretty rundown school. The teachers and the staff were nice enough, but I've definitely been in more than one scary situation because of this school's location. But I digress. While at this school, I made an assortment of friends, but there was one girl in particular who became my best friend. Her name was Brittany. My new friend was pretty problematic, I guess you could say. She'd talk to a lot of older boys, put herself in less than ideal scenarios, that kind of thing. Turns out she was acting out during her home life too. Much like me, she was being raised by her stepdad and mother. The only difference is, well, there's a lot, but details, and her mum was basically not too keen on her daughter chatting with her biological father, if you catch my drift. Brittany's mum never really disclosed why, but whenever he did come over to talk with Brittany, it was always done under supervision. I only met the guy once. Brittany had invited me over to her house for a sleepover on one occasion, my first time there too, and her dad dropped by unexpectedly. I can't really remember much about what he said to Brittany or how her mum reacted. I'd assumed that it wasn't good, but there is one thing that I can still remember till this day. The minute that he walked in, there was a complete shift in the air. And I'm not talking about tension, but like the hairs on the back of my neck instantly stood up. Like I was prey and there was a wolf nearby. Needless to say, I kept my interactions with Mr. Creepy short and simple, and I kept my distance from him too. That was the only time that I ever met the guy, and I'm very thankful for it too, because, well, fast forward a couple of years, I graduated from that middle school and started high school. I kept in touch with one of my friends, who, their name was Rain, but I lost contact with Brittany. I can't exactly remember why. I guess we sort of just stopped talking as much and sort of drifted apart, but Rain and I had met up at a local mall and were at the food court reminiscing about our middle school days. And that's when Rain perked up and asked me if I'd heard about what happened with Brittany. I obviously said no, that me and her sort of lost contact. Rain grinned that familiar way. She was about to give me some juicy gossip, and I knew it. I thought she was going to tell me that Brittany got pregnant or something, but boy oh boy, that couldn't have been further from the truth. Brittany's father is an offender, which I didn't know. But back in 2009, he had picked up a street worker and drove her to a motel. I won't go into detail about what had happened, but a young woman lost her life because of this guy. He managed to get away with it for 3 years as well before the police were able to find him. And the way that they accomplished it? Well, the police released video surveillance of his truck and released it to the public. Someone was able to identify who the truck belonged to, and the cops were finally able to work their way from there. And from what I hear, he was charged with first-degree murder and will only spend 7 years in prison, since he spent a few years in jail while the trial took place. It was an extremely sad thing to find out. Brittany and I might have drifted apart, but I can't imagine what she went through and is still going through after what her dad did. I hope that wherever she is, she's doing okay, and I hope that the family who lost their loved one is able to find some peace someday too. What a horrible thing to happen. When I was 18, I went on my first trip alone to Seattle from Montana. I was alone with my dog, and it was a pretty normal trip overall, except we were driving late at night. I was listening to the BBC talk show on AM, and they were talking about some subject I don't really remember, but it was spooky and the radio was super static. We were in the area of I-90 that doesn't have much signal and is pretty much just 100% empty and quiet before the pass. I suddenly got really tired and my radio wasn't working, so I decided to pull off to sleep. I decided to pull off on a deserted exit with no services. I believe it was called 6 Mile Road or something like that, but anyways, it was extremely dark out there. I couldn't see anything to my sides or in front of me. There was fog on the road as well, swirling around just in front of my headlights. And there was absolutely nothing around me for like a mile, and the road didn't veer off anywhere either. So after a bit of driving, I pulled up to this huge sort of white-grey warehouse with no windows. There were several white vans and black cars parked around it. They looked very expensive for being in the middle of nowhere, but the warehouse was locked by a huge barbed wire fence. I backed up my car a bit, and I decided to park by the tree since it didn't appear that anybody was around. Everything was still dark and silent. There was no wind except for a slight breeze carrying the fog around the cement. I turned my car off completely and wrapped myself up in my blanket. I locked all the doors, and I was laying there trying to sleep and looking at the time on my phone. It was 2 a.m. And at that same moment, my car started to physically shake. My dog started whining and hid behind the passenger chair, obviously distressed. I looked outside of my window, but everything was pitch black without my headlights. I couldn't see anything, but my car was shaking back and forth and side to side even, like something was grabbing it and pushing it around. I turned it on, freaking out, and backed up, but there was still nothing around me at all except for the strange facility. There were no animals, no people, not that I could see anyway. My car stopped shaking as soon as I backed up though, and I had this horrible feeling of dread and that I was being watched and that I wasn't supposed to be there. So, in the end, I left the area as fast as I could. But the strangest thing is that when I got back on the road, I noticed that my car's time was now 4:30 a.m. and I had a quarter of a tank less gas. It was already getting light out and I don't remember going anywhere, and my phone's time matched the car, so I really don't know what the heck happened. There's only 1 hour of time difference between Montana and WA, so it wasn't that. And I still to this day just don't know what the heck happened there. I tried looking up the area with my ex on Google Maps a year ago, and I found a weird government facility near this place with a weird name that may have been the warehouse that I went to. I'll try to find it again, and it definitely feels like something that, I don't know, maybe I shouldn't have seen it. So this is a very strange story, and I really don't know what to think about it, but I'm a member of a website that posts pictures of gravestones for people. One day, a picture was requested of a very old gravestone in a graveyard walking distance from my house, so I agreed to take it. I walked there, found the grave, and stood over the almost 200-year-old grave to see if it was the grave that I was looking for, considering how degraded the stone was. And as I was standing there, my foot suddenly began to sink into the grave. In fact, I couldn't get out, and soon it was up to my hip. I nearly passed out. I was sure that something was going to grab my foot. I think I was in shock, but it took me several minutes to get free, and I very nearly lost my shoe. I was sobbing when I was done as I was running away, but that night too, I had an extremely vivid dream that I still remember. I was talking to what I thought was a Civil War soldier on a battlefield. He was telling me all about his life and apologizing for scaring me, and he told me to call him Charlie. Anyway, the next day I went to church to let them know about the collapsed grave, for safety reasons and all that. They looked it up on their map to make sure it was the one that I was talking about, and I was absolutely jaw-dropped to find out that the grave belonged to a soldier who was killed in the Civil War, and his first name was Charles. So this has quite a bit of backstory. Strap in. This all started back in 2011 when I was 12 and had moved into a new home with my family. From the get-go, that place made me feel some type of way. It wasn't good or bad, just like I was always being watched, which of course creeped me out a bit. There were a handful of hotspots too throughout the house where I would feel this. One being what we called the pink bathroom, which was, as you can guess, all pink. Pink tiling, pink sink, pink flooring even, everything. It was also a bit small, and I always felt like it was a bit hard to breathe in there, and overall I just hated the energy. I figured maybe I was just claustrophobic or something. Another was this part of the hall that led directly into my bedroom and branched off directly into the living room as well. Kind of like a T in a road. But anyways, you almost always felt eyes on you coming from that corner, whether you were in the living room or my room, and it felt just as creepy regardless if it was morning or night. The final spot was, of course, the basement. The basement was half finished. The finished half was like a bar area, I guess, but had the stools and everything still there, and the unfinished half was the laundry or storage or sort of workshop thing. Actually, when we first moved in there, my dad and sister and I were looking through the workshop. There were a bunch of old yearbooks from the school that I went to and other memorabilia. We took a break and headed upstairs for lunch and came back to find that the door would no longer open. It seemed like the door handle had fell off while we were away or something, and the door was sort of stuck in place. Not super sure how that could have happened, especially considering that it locked from the inside and none of us locked it. But on top of that, my mum had my sister and I wash our dog down in the basement. We had a laundry area and a big tub sink, but we hated doing it. I always felt like when I was down there that someone was just watching me. I even had an idea of what he looked like. I imagined a very tall man in a button-up and slacks standing in the corner, right by the entrance to the back of the bar area that resided mainly on the furnished side. My hair would stand on end every time, and always I would sprint up those stairs whenever I was done down there, and the rest of the house felt off too, but those were the big spots that just sort of radiated energy. Anyway, so fast forward a few years and we moved around in 2014, and by that point I had had a handful of bad dreams about that house. I had dreams of it when I lived there, which made sense, but even after leaving they seemed to persist. In fact, they actually persisted up to 2020, and by that point I was 21 years old. I'd been having dreams of that place for nearly a decade, and by this point the dreams sort of escalated to night terrors too. I would wake up screaming in the middle of the night. The dreams always occurred every 3 to 6 months, but by April of 2020, I had had 3 intense night terrors about the house within 3 months. The last dream being my sister telling me that someone had died in the pink bathroom. I started realizing that maybe something else was going on. I started researching the house after this and found that the first owners, the ones who had built that house back in, I believe, was the 1950s, This seemed like a good place to start anyway. I quickly discovered that it was a family that lived there and that the father had died in the house in the 1980s. Upon further investigation, I learned that he had died of a massive heart attack in the house. This house was located directly across the street from a hospital, like the driveway and the hospital lot entrance sort of lined up a bit. Definitely clued me in on this being a traumatic death, so I continued and I found his wife's obituary too. She had stayed in the house after he had passed, and since she had passed more recently, the information regarding their children was more up to date. I immediately felt drawn to one particular child, their one daughter. I actually ended up finding her on Facebook and reaching out too, and of course I realized what I was about to do could be potentially harmful or hurtful, so I prepared my message accordingly, trying my best not to do that, but I even mentioned the hotspots we covered earlier. I didn't mention what sensations or events happened in those areas though, since I wanted to see what she had to say. But my heart stopped when I read that he had died in that pink bathroom. And I remembered where I dreamed my sister told me somebody had died in that pink bathroom, and now all I could wonder was, could that have been a weird coincidence? She continued to say that she loved his workshop and that he never let anyone in it, and on top of that, always spent time downstairs by that corner entrance in his bar, since that's where he kept his favorite drinks. My bedroom belonged to his wife, who no longer loved him the way that he loved her, which would make sense as to why I felt eyes from the doorway, but never would that presence enter my room, I guess. She also shared that she was the child closest with her father, and they shared the room my sister stayed in. I asked my sister about this later on, and she stated that she definitely felt uncomfortable in the house, but never any specifics. I told the daughter the man that I saw in my imagination, the very tall, well-dressed man, and she said that her dad was 6'3", and a businessman, always in a button-down and slacks. She even sent a picture of him, and man, I was completely startled by how closely this guy looked like the man in my head. After this, I've never had another dream involving that house ever again, though. It's been almost 3 years free of those awful dreams, and sometimes I wonder, could he have used me to tell his daughter that he was so close with that he was still around, that there was more to the other side, and that the only way to get my attention was through my dreams? It also seems so self-absorbed to think that he could choose me to do such a thing, but I'm just not sure of any other explanation as to what happened here. All my life I've had weird paranormal, or I guess you could say borderline psychic occurrences, but this one is definitely the most interesting to date. So I don't remember exactly how old I was at that time, but I was still in kindergarten. When my dad picked me up, we often used to stop by in the park on the way home, and for a little context, my dad was and is a great man, and when I was little, around that same time, he used to make maps for treasures for me to find, and he would actually hide some real treasures around the park so that I could find them. So, we were in the park as usual, and while we were walking there was this sort of sewer hole from which were coming waves of steam as if it was a furnace or something. We were heading towards it to check it out, and I remember my dad saying, "Look, maybe here is where Santa prepares the gifts for the good children." I laughed a little bit at that because around that time I already knew that Santa wasn't real. Then as we passed by the hole, I looked through the holes of the covering, and what I saw was a man wearing a weird triangle-shaped head. Everything happened very fast, and I could only barely see through the holes and all the steam, but the man was sitting on a table, and it looked as if he was writing something. When I saw him, I remember freezing for a little moment, and there were many things going on through my little head at that time, and I thought either that was a real elf and my dad was telling the truth, or maybe it was a man hired by him for me to see, just like he hid all the treasures. Anyway, I didn't really tell him anything, and he didn't say anything either. When we arrived home, I remember telling my grandma that I saw a Christmas elf in the park, and she laughed and said, "That's great," or something to that effect. I knew she didn't believe me, obviously, and my dad was also laughing. The following days, though, I kept thinking about it, but with time I just went on with the idea that my dad told some man to dress up as an elf and jump in the sewer for me to see to make me believe in magic of Christmas or something. Well, a few years later I finally asked him about it, and he said that he never did this, and he asked me more about what I saw. I told him, and he said that it was probably just my wild imagination and being little. However, I know exactly what I saw, and I remember clearly to this day what it was. I even went to the exact same park since then to inspect that area, but a lot has changed since then, and that place looks totally different now. No walking path, no sewer hole, just plain grass there now. But what's even weirder is that, as the years went by, whenever I remember that man, I start comparing him more and more with myself. I only saw him briefly and from behind, but I could see his hair and the color and the type that was just as mine, and also his back looked like mine in some pics that I took after I grew up as well. This might just be me overthinking it throughout time, I admit, but anyway, I know it's a weird story, and whether you believe it or not, it's up to you, but it is one of the strangest things that has ever happened to me. I'm not sure what year this took place, but my little sister was of preschool age. I'm 2.5 years older than her, and we're now in our 20s. So my family was in San Diego visiting my grandparents. They live inland in a quiet neighborhood. We were racing our scooters down the sidewalk in front of the house one by one. My little sister, my big sister and I, all girls. Our parents were inside. A van came down the road at some point, and we initially thought nothing of it, but the van kept coming back. Every couple of minutes it would pass again, and after a short amount of time we noticed it. We continued to scooter. The van would take its time passing, slowing down. It was clear that whoever was driving was paying close attention to us, and I was on guard by this point. My baby sister takes her turn, scootering down the sidewalk. The van passes again and comes to a crawl directly beside her. It stops next to my little sister as she's slowing down. My big sister and I are screaming for her to come back, paralyzed with fear. I genuinely thought I was about to watch her be snatched up, but luckily she turned around and scooted past the doors of the van a second or two after it stopped. I ran up to meet her. The driver left quickly, presumably to circle back around, and they did. My older sister had gone inside to alert my mother, who promptly came out. Well, we sat on the steps in front of my grandparents' house waiting. The van came around the corner, and once they saw my mum, they sped off down the road so fast. We didn't get the license plate number, which we immediately regretted, but I'll never forget that experience and the sheer terror I felt as I watched my baby sister standing next to that van, just waiting for that sliding door to open up and for her to be snatched inside. The memory of these events is still clear years later. It really frightened me at the time, but looking back, I don't know if it was evil at all. It just wanted to play, it seemed, and seemed perhaps lonely. I think it could have been perhaps the spirit of a child itself or something. Anyway, when I was 8, my bedroom and bed were arranged such that if I lay on my left-hand side, I could see the landing and the stairs. My bedroom was adjacent to the bathroom and toilet, so I could see when people went up and down the stairs and to the bathroom as well. I had a 4-year-old sister too, and a newborn brother. My sister had her own bedroom, and the baby slept in my parents' bedroom. My sister would go to bed at least an hour before me, and the landing light would be left on until my parents went to bed. And one night, I was lying on my right-hand side, trying to go to sleep, when I felt a poke in my back. I spun around, and what I saw was a small dark shadow run out of the room, across the landing and down the stairs. I presumed that it was my little sister, so I went downstairs and complained to my mum and dad that she had poked me and how come she was still up. My mum took me back upstairs and showed me that my little sister was still asleep in bed. I thought that she must have snook back into her bed, but when I checked, she was deeply asleep. Following nights, I tried to always lay on my left so that I could see who was poking me. Nothing happened, so I went back to normal. And a few nights later, the poking happened again. I jumped out of bed, ran into my sister's room, and shouted at her to stop poking me. This woke her up and she started screaming and crying, obviously. I was told off by my mum and sent back to bed. But as I lay there watching the door, I saw this small dark shadow slowly slip through the door, cross the landing, and head down the stairs again. Every now and then, when I would lay on my right, the poking would happen again, and I'd see the shadow running away. I tried telling my parents, but they thought that I must have been dreaming, but I knew that I wasn't. This continued sporadically as well until my brother needed his own bedroom, and I moved to a new bedroom in the loft space. My sister, she moved into my old bedroom, and he moved into her old bedroom. Bizarrely, years later at her wedding reception, she told the story of me tormenting her by poking her in the back some nights when she was trying to go to sleep in my old bedroom. But obviously, I never did this. I have to wonder, was it the same small dark shadow that I experienced? The house that I live in was built sometime in the 40s, and it sits on 5 acres of land. I live in a very small town, smaller than small actually. I call it a micro town. I mean, it's hardly even a town, there's just not much here, and it's pretty rural, but nestled between 2 other cities. Only about a quarter of our land is cleared, the rest is dense woods, but we don't really go back in there often because of ticks. However, my boyfriend has been throughout the whole property at some point, and he came across what used to be another house deep in the woods. It looks as though it burned down apparently, and all that's left is some bricks, which actually match the bricks of our fireplace and front porch, and the cement blocks the house once sat on too, which matched the cement blocks of our house. But our house is all wood, except for vinyl siding, which was probably put on in the last 30 years or so, I'm guessing. I'm assuming the old house burned down and the original family rebuilt the current one that we live in. All 5 acres have remained as one property over the years, so the original family owned every bit that we own now, and there's just really no record to my knowledge of the house that we found in the woods, so there's no telling how old it actually is. The town, it was established in the 1830s. Something odd to note too is that there are no cemeteries here, which I do know that it was common to have a family plot on your own property, and most homes were sit on at least a few acres, so honestly, I believe that there could be a couple of people buried here somewhere, but we haven't found any headstones or anything. But also, if they were marked with flat headstones, then they could possibly be grown over or covered, and we just haven't found them. So, here's where the paranormal aspect comes into play though. A few months ago, I was getting ready for work. I was in the bathroom with the door open. The bathroom is at the very back of the house when I suddenly heard a woman talking. As I stepped out into the hall, it suddenly stopped. I sort of walked around and I made sure the TV wasn't on or the computer or something, and that it wasn't my phone, which was right next to me. In the end, I just couldn't find anything, so I brushed it off and I carried on. I did tell my boyfriend's dad about it though, and so he mentioned seeing a shadow figure in the living room or dining room area once, which is where the woman's voice, I think, was coming from. A few days ago though, while I was at work, my boyfriend was here alone in the office at the back of the house by the bathroom. He was messing with a knife or something, and all of a sudden he hears a woman's laughing, and it sounded like it came from the front of the house, he said. He's a complete skeptic and has never had a paranormal experience before, but he texted me right away, and I reminded him of when I heard her talking too. And this brings me to 2 nights ago. So we were sitting on our bed with the door open, right across from the kitchen, We had the lights off aside from the lamp in our room, and he looked at me and said that he apparently just saw a figure walk across the kitchen toward the dining room. I've personally never seen a figure myself, or anything physical, I guess you could say, but we aren't really scared, I guess. Whatever is here seems to be friendly so far. I just wish that I knew more about the history of this property, and if I could figure that out, then maybe I could figure who this ghost is that seems to be with us. This occurred in the winter of 2017. I'm a male in my 20s living alone in a studio apartment in a bad neighborhood at the time, and it was a normal weekday night. I spent it indoors playing games on my PS4 and smoking a bit early into the morning. My lights were off and only the glare of the TV lit up the room slightly. And all of a sudden, at around 2 in the morning, I hear a knock at my door. I ignored it at first, thinking that it was the game, but then I heard it again, and I quickly paused the game and went over to the door quietly. I looked out the peephole and said, "Who is it?" Then the stranger responded by saying that it's the mailman. I go over to my window next to the door to get a better look at this person. There obviously are no mailmen that deliver at 2 a.m, so I opened the shutters slightly and I saw a Caucasian man that looks like maybe he was on drugs or something. He was also hiding a large black trash bag that looked like it was full. I yelled at him in anger through the window, "You're not the mailman, get away from here." He sort of stood there for a moment, not even noticed that I'm looking right at him. Then he sort of continues to wobble away slowly, dragging his heavy trash bag of who knows what away with him. I didn't report the incident, and I never saw the creep again, but I heard some creepy stories from others around the neighborhood that seemed to align with my experience, and I don't know, something about that guy just told me that he was up to no good. So, to begin this, I just enrolled at my university as a mature student. I was 22, so a little bit older than the norm, which is around 18 to 19. And because of this, I was allowed to enter my dorms a week before the rest of the students would arrive. So, I was basically the only person staying in the entire apartment block for the week, 7 floors and probably over 100 rooms, and I lived on the 7th floor. So, day one, I was part of a Head Start program for the mature students getting back into education. On my first day, I went to the icebreakers and got to meet my fellow mature students. Quite a good time too, I must admit. The evening comes and I'm leaving everyone and heading back to the block. None of the friends that I had met earlier in the day lived in my block, so it was kind of sad, but anyway, I get back, put a pizza in the oven and just hop into bed and start watching a random stuff on my laptop. About 10 minutes later, I hear the door to my flat open and close, and I think, yes, I've got a flatmate now. That's what I thought at least. So I rushed up out of bed and went to open my door to greet them. And as I look out from my room into the hallway, there's nothing. No one, in fact. I look either side of the hallway before leaving the room, and it's completely empty. Me being the extrovert that I am, though, I assume that maybe they've already gone into their room somehow, so I proceed to knock on all the doors of my flat one by one. There were 10 plus rooms, and a kitchen as well. And after knocking on all the doors and getting no answer, I just sort of dismiss it as me hearing things, or maybe a weird noise from the oven or something. And in the end, I just eat my pizza and I fall asleep to the TV. So the second day, I wake up full of energy and excited for the new day. I have a mini football that I brought with me, and since I'm the only person in the flat, I figured that I'm just going to go kick this ball around and make a ton of noise, that I should probably do that before all my flatmates move in and complain. After all, I have the whole flat to myself for the whole week. So, I immerse myself into smacking this football around the entire flat, off the walls, ceilings, against the oven, fridge, anything really. Plus, it was small, so it wouldn't cause any damage or anything. But after I'm done with that, I go to my introduction sessions and I make a few friends there. One of them is called George. We're all sort of getting along and having a good time, and then the evening comes and I have to head back. But this time I just head into my room, drop my bag down, and I head into the kitchen. I make dinner and chill for a bit. Then I head back into my room and watch some more TV. It's starting to get late, like 3 or 4 a.m. I'm definitely a night owl, and this is when I start to hear groaning in the hallway outside of my room. It sounds a bit like somebody who has had too much to drink and is sort of stumbling to their room, so I open the door, but again, there's nothing and no one there. That's weird, I thought. I'm sure I heard someone. I cautiously make my way back into bed, and maybe 5 minutes pass when I distinctly hear the sounds of, like, nails scratching on the outside of my door. So I think to myself, okay, I definitely have a flatmate out there somewhere. They're probably drunk, and I'm going to go and help them out. So I rush out the door this time, but same thing. Nobody is there. This time, I got out there so quickly that there's just no way that someone could have disappeared. I even go around and knock on all of the doors again, but there's no answer. This happens a few times that night as well, and I eventually just get really tired and I fall asleep. Day 3 comes around, and not much happened on the 3rd day, but something that I did notice is that it was strange how my football that I was kicking around the flat would always end up under my bed in the far corner, no matter where I left it the night before. I'd only been there for 2 nights at this point, so I just thought maybe the floor was uneven or something. I later found out that it wasn't, though. Day 4, and same usual routine of going to my sessions and then heading back. This time I'm up late again and I get a bit hungry, so I open my door, which is right next to the kitchen, and as I'm about to enter and turn the light on, I hear, "Hey," clear as day. It was such a vivid sound that I even pictured George's face in my head as I turned around because it sounded like him. I thought that a new flatmate had come to greet me or something. However, when I do turn, again, there's nobody there. The hallway is completely empty. But I specifically heard someone call out to me. That one was very strange, and I got goosebumps from that. I end up going to the fridge, grabbing a snack, and then I sort of hustled my way back to bed and I fell asleep. Day 5, after all of the strange goings-on in the past 4 days, I reckon to myself that I do have a flatmate and I just haven't met them yet. So when I get up, I knock on all the doors again, but there's definitely no answer. I go about my day, same as before. I stayed out late this night as there was a little party or sort of social gathering on campus. And as I'm coming home now, I open the door to my block with my keycard and walk over to the elevator. I normally press 7th floor, and when it arrives, there's this little pleasant sort of jingle female voice that says 7th floor, or whatever, and so as usual I press 7. The elevator has mirrors on every wall, so I'm just sort of staring at my reflection blankly while it goes up. Then as it gets to my floor, instead of the female voice coming out of the lift, it was a male voice. What it said I don't really recall, but I do remember as I'm looking at my reflection, my eyes bulged open like, what the heck was that? I look at the number and it's my floor. Thinking that my mind is playing tricks on me and maybe it had been a male voice, not a female's the whole time, I press 6 to go down a floor. When I arrive, just like always though, the female voice comes out of the speaker, announcing 6th floor in the same pleasant tone. Maybe it's a male voice for the 7th and I just haven't noticed. I go back up to my floor and this time it's back to the female voice. Weird, I thought. I head back and I unwind a bit until I fall asleep. Day 6, probably the least eventful day. Not much out of the ordinary happened, other than the football always ending up under my bed. So it was kind of a nice change, to be honest, but instead I spent the time going floor to floor and just looking at the empty block to see if anyone at all had moved in, but from what I could see, no. Day 7 arrives and finally I wake up to the sound of people chatting outside the entrance to my block. I jump out of bed and look out the window. It overlooked the entrance. And finally some flatmates, I thought. I get dressed and head straight down to greet them. There's a group of them that have just arrived and have started moving into the block. When I go over and speak to them, they're talking about ghosts and paranormal things. Then I ask them, "Why did you bring up that topic?" And one of them tells me our campus is haunted. This is apparently the most haunted campus in the UK, and that someone had apparently ended their lives in the block that I had just been staying alone in for a week, allegedly a few years prior. He had lived on the 6th floor and had been having a hard time and ended up jumping from his room window or something, and I was a bit startled and thought that they were lying, but then one of them shows me an online article about it. And all that stuff that was happening while I was there by myself the whole week, I had no idea about this history. Then I proceeded to tell him about what had been happening and how I didn't know that the block or the campus itself was haunted. Needless to say, it spooked them out a lot. But hey, at least I've got other people living in the block now too, huh? Over the course of that year that I spent in that block, I experienced many more paranormal occurrences that I haven't included, but yeah, that place is most definitely haunted. There's always a really strange feeling there as well. Funnily enough, it's right opposite a cemetery, and I often wondered if there was some sort of connection to that too. During the time that these events had taken place too, I was very comfortable with paranormal experiences, so I didn't really get too scared, I guess you could say, but it always was a little bit creepy. More creepy than other places for sure. My sister always locks her doors. She got a job after college in the Washington, D.C. area, big city. She lived alone with her cats during 9/11 and the sniper shootings. She obviously kept her apartment doors locked. She kept her car doors locked. She locked her windows, locked everything in fact. So what are the chances that the one night that she left her back door unlocked, that would be the only night that someone would try to get in? It's weird, right? So, getting tired of the big city stress, she bounced around a bit before settling in with our paternal grandparents in southern New Mexico. She took care of Grandma, who was going blind, and helped clean the house and run errands while she looked for a job. After she found a good job nearby, she was able to purchase her first home. She still helped the grandparents on the weekends until Grandma got to needing a care facility. My sister got herself a little dog to go along with the two cats, and one night after taking the dog out for this evening piddle, she locked up and went to bed. Like I said, she always locked up. She slept deeply until the early morning hours of dark 30 when she heard her toilet flush. Being such a locker of doors, she was unprepared for an actual breach of security, so kicking her blankets off, she stumbled stupidly and with much anxiety into the kitchen to face her intruder unarmed, a 6-foot-tall, 250-pound male. She said, "Huh? Dad, is that you?" And he said, "Sorry, I was helping to load up Grandma and Grandpa's furniture into the moving truck. I got done late and needed a motel before the long drive home, but thought that I'd see if you were still up. Your lights were out, but the back door was open, so I slept on the couch." The little dog whimpered a bit. My sister looked down at the confused face and said, You're the dog. You're supposed to tell me about these things." The two cats already knew who Dad was and probably just shuffled behind the dog's back anyway. But in all of these years, we've never figured out exactly how the back door got left open that one night. And the thought that it could have been a stranger is creepy enough to keep her locking her doors religiously. And my doors too. A few years ago, I was staying in a family resort in Turkey with my parents and sister. I was 17 then, and one night after we had finished dinner, I wanted to go upstairs to our hotel room to get my jacket. The guy that entered the elevator with me was already giving me some weird vibes, but I shook it off. He got off at the same floor as me and also followed me down the path to our room. I eventually started running because I felt so uneasy and he was just getting too close. So I reached our room and thought that was it, just a really weird encounter and perhaps me overreacting a bit. I had sufficiently calmed down and was actually going to leave when our hotel room's phone rang. I picked up, assuming my parents had a phone call from the reception or something, but instead, it was a male voice telling me how sexy I looked and how much he wanted to have his way with me. I hung up immediately and started crying. That dude had been close enough to see which room that I had entered to be able to make that call. The phone rang a few times more as well, but I just didn't pick it up. I must have been in our room for a long time too, because my parents had gotten worried and they had come upstairs to check on me. I explained what happened, and when the phone rang once again, my father picked it up. There was silence on the other side and the call was quickly ended. I was terrified that I'd see the man again, but thankfully I didn't. I kept looking out for him at the pool, at the restaurant, etc., but I never saw him again. My parents told me to brush it off and that such creeps are everywhere, but at the time and at that age, it really shook me to the core. I was horrified about what may have happened if I hadn't started running that day. And to this day, I hate walking down long hotel floors on my own. It just fills me with dread. This night, I was hanging out with 3 friends, Sarah, Nick, and Mary. We were celebrating Nick's birthday at his place, which happened to have a hot tub in the backyard. After a couple of hours and a couple of too many beers, we jokingly suggested skinny dipping in the hot tub as some kind of birthday present. It would have probably stopped there too if it wasn't for our drunkenness, but eventually we just said, let's do it. Now, for context, Nick's house was by a forest and was very isolated from neighbours. Adding to that, it was maybe past midnight, and anything past the Christmas lights of dubious quality that were spread around the yard was basically pitch black. Being absolute cowards, going out there without Nick's parents home would have been unimaginable if it hadn't have been for the wonders of inebriation. So, semi-reluctantly, I followed my friends into the night with a towel on my shoulder. We reached the hot tub that was worryingly close to the edge of the woods, and we started stripping. Everything was fine for the next 30 minutes or so, apart from the occasional branch cracking. But we were having fun, telling stories or rambling about stupid stuff, and the fear quickly faded away. That was, until a deafening shriek came from the darkness of the forest, lasting for about 5 seconds. It sounded like a human voice too, but it almost didn't sound like a person. We all turned livid, being silent for what seemed like hours, and I even saw Nick lose his boner in a matter of seconds. We didn't dare try to look into the forest, except Mary, who just grew a pair of balls out of nowhere and picked up her phone to use the flashlight. We couldn't help but follow the light too as she pointed it at the forest, who seemed unaffected by it, as if the darkness was sort of swallowing it. But there was nothing. As we were about to stop looking though, the void stared back at us. Mary shined her light far behind Sarah, and it reflected a pair of eyes and a white form in the distance. That was the straw that broke the camel's back. We instantly rushed out of the tub without giving a single thought about gathering our clothes. Mary and I screamed. Apparently her balls had been blown to smithereens at this point, and we all ran towards the back entrance as fast as possible. Nick immediately got a knife while we locked every door and window. We wanted to call Nick's parents or the police or anyone, but our phones were over by the forest where we'd left them in our clothes. Seeing no other choice, Nick put shoes on and made a run for it. He managed to get his phone, but he'd heard loud breathing coming from the forest, meaning that whatever or whoever was there hadn't left. And what followed were the worst 2 hours of my life. Nick got his parents to make their way home, handed us towels, and so we could finally cover ourselves. We gathered in the basement where there were no windows. We spent most of the time in silence, waiting for something to happen. And half an hour in, we heard another shriek, more distant this time. Only this time, it was shortly followed by knocks on the door that couldn't possibly be Nick's parents. Sarah actually started crying at this point, but thankfully, nothing else happened after that. The parents arrived and allowed us to sleep in the basement for safety. They hadn't heard or seen anything and were pretty sure that we just imagined stuff. We hardly slept that night, and once the morning came, we went out to get our stuff. The phones, keys, wallets were all there. The only things missing, though, were Nick's shirt and Sarah and Mary's panties. I wasn't wearing any that night. So that left us with two possible scenarios. A weird, pale pervert spied on us in an isolated area deep in the woods, or whatever other creepy stuff roams in there just decided to spook us that night. I often wonder which one it was. I was always an extremely small and sickly child. I looked young for my age, and my family and I lived out of town, about 8 miles out. Our little community was also next to a highway. The school bus would drop me off 2 blocks away from home, and one day I noticed a red truck following slowly behind me, so slow that I figured that they were just looking for a house or something. I ignored it and walked to my house, but that was just the beginning of it. Consistently, this truck would follow slowly behind me. After a couple of days of this, I walked into my house, I was always the first one home, and looked out the window, and inside was an older man and a black lab. He was staring at me, idling outside inside of his truck. Then he just pulled away. It was at this point that I decided that enough was enough. I told my parents, of course my sister was quick to jump in, that I was lying. I will admit that I had a habit of telling stories at this age, but my mum thankfully believed me. She drove me to the bus stop the next morning. The red truck was there, across the street at the gas station, pointing toward the bus. I got on the bus and my mum decided to drive around the truck. She described the scene this way. The man was disheveled and dirty, hunched over his seat just staring at the bus. His license plates were caked in mud, so she couldn't make them out. It freaked her out so much too that she called the police and the school. I went to school that day and was quickly pulled into the office. The man had apparently been spotted at the school waiting in his truck. That day I rode the bus home, but this time the truck was parked alongside the street, which meant that I would have to walk past this man's driver's side door to get home. I debated considering running for it. Apparently this man was getting desperate now that he was spotted. But a police car showed up, and I talked to the policeman. They went to go talk to the man, but as soon as they started to get closer, he quickly pulled away from the curb in high speed and absolutely flew down the highway. I never did see him again after that, and although I do think the police pursued him, I don't believe that he was ever caught. Because of this experience, I'm extremely guarded and paranoid with my own daughter and her soon-to-be sibling. The world is a terrifying place sometimes, especially these days, and children go missing so easily. I don't like to think about it if I'd been grabbed. I wouldn't be here sharing this if that was the case. My kids wouldn't exist. I truly think that I was lucky, and many children aren't. Growing up, I, a 29-year-old female, I actually lived in a haunted house. My sisters and mother all have an affinity for the paranormal, but I am too scared to allow myself to see it. Every time something unexplainable happened, I would always run away, ignore it, pretend it never happened, and just try to distract myself. Examples would be hearing my parents call my name when I know that I'm home alone, hearing sort of clicking noises that are coming from the middle of an empty room, clearly seeing someone standing in the corner as I pass by, doing a double take for them to just no longer be there. But one night, when I was about 19, I was staying up late watching cartoons and just drawing. It was about 2 in the morning when my dog picked up her head and started looking towards the middle of my room. She bolted back as if something freaked her out, and then immediately got off my bed and ran to the middle of this room, barking hysterically at something that I couldn't see. This immediately gave me goosebumps, and I called my dog back multiple times, trying to get her back to my bed and make her calm down, but she just wouldn't stop. And then it happened. I felt something, and it was honestly like someone squeezed my legs. I had both my legs out in front of me, sitting up, and they were under blankets. I felt it, but I thought that I was imagining it at first. But then I looked down to see, clear as day, 2 large hand-shaped imprints over the blankets, slowly running from below my knees up to my thighs. My lights were on, and I was sober. I was fully awake. There was no denying that it happened. I couldn't move. I didn't know what to do. Not that I was experiencing sleep paralysis. I was just panicking. I started crying and called for my younger sister, sleeping in another room next to me, over and over, until she woke up and came to my room. My dog didn't stop barking too until my sister came into my room. I had a full-blown panic attack after this, and it was terrifying. Another strange factor was that around this time too, we had a peeping Tom that was leaving lots of evidence of them looking through our windows, trying to open windows and even getting into our cars. He would leave handprints and forehead prints on our windows, and I think that I may have woken up while he was watching because he left a stepladder. He grabbed it from my side yard, and it was against my window on multiple occasions. Another time we found bare footprints outside of our window in the mud after a rainy night, but we never figured out who it was. But all my sisters and I have since moved out, and my parents haven't noticed anything else weird happening since we moved out. They didn't really notice it before either. I was the only one finding or pointing out the occurrences, I guess, but I know that these are 2 different situations. But sometimes I feel like they are related somehow, because they both happened at the same time. Anyway, I moved out a couple of years later with no reoccurrence of that night. It was one of the scariest experiences that I've ever had, and when I talk about this story out loud, I still tear up and get emotional about it. I do still experience, well, some small things depending on where I live. Thankfully, the house that I now own does not have any weird vibes or things happening after a couple of years of living here. So last night, I was skiing and camping out of my RV in an unofficial secret spot. High in the Sierra Nevadas of California, the location was right next to one of the most imposing peaks of the area, at the base of which was a frozen lake and resort closed for the season. Sparse trees surrounded the lake, and a sort of pillowy fog hung over the icy expanse at dawn and dusk. Obscured by banks of snow from the adjacent highway, plow drivers had only bothered to clear a small portion of the road into this resort. It was the perfect place to hide out for a few nights. As soon as I tucked into bed, I started to hear the strange noises again, though. This time, they wouldn't stop. From the absolute darkness and the otherwise total silence of a blanket of snow, I swore that I could hear something moving. Not human footsteps, but it sounded like, I don't know, 2 snow shovels piercing the ground. Quietly but quickly it traveled. Through my open windows, I suddenly felt an intense feeling of being watched as well. Whatever this was, it came from towards the lake, a path which is covered in 3 feet of powder. The noises got louder until it was right up to the side of my window. Terrified and afraid to even make a sound, I lay in my bed watching and listening. Only a thin bug screen separated me from this creature in the pitch darkness. On a night without even a breath of wind to cause the sensation, I felt my RV pitch from side to side all of a sudden. It had climbed to the top, and as it clambered about, I heard the now familiar noise of the night's frozen dew cracking under its weight. I could hear the ice fragments shed off the edges of my home and burst upon hitting the ground. I say familiar too because I had heard these noises before. On the first night, ice had also fallen with the sound of footsteps and the shaking of the RV. Thinking that it was a person up to no good, I charged outside with a flashlight and a knife. After all, the paranormal usually has a logical explanation, right? Examining the site carefully, though, there wasn't so much as a new print in the snow. Satisfied, and with the noises gone, I slept unperturbed for the rest of the night. The second night, my brother slept in the room, and I heard the ice crack again, but no more. Neither compared to this third night. judging from the amount the RV rocked as the entity moved. It was lightweight, I would guess, and agile. It was clever enough to completely stop moving as a car from the highway approached as well, long before lights would dimly illuminate the campsite even. It watched me, even when it seemed to stop. It seemed to climb down from the roof. I could hear its snow shovel feet crunch into the ground as it began to sort of pace around my camper, I would guess. The creature alternated from roof and sides, and it was then that I realized that it was looking for a way in. Breaking free from my petrification, I gently rolled over in bed and shut the two windows next to my head, covering them with the blinds. It noticed. I immediately heard the shoveling retreat, but it didn't leave altogether. Straining my ears, I could tell that it was pacing about maybe 30 yards away. Even though there was no wind, what sounded like a metal sign sort of clanging against a tree persisted. I tiptoed to my knife and clutched it against me, and eventually I fell into a fitful sleep like that. I had a pleasant dream about my grandparents that night. At the end, it changed though. I was on the couch of the camper, and from a roof vent above me, a dark ooze draped into my space. Gathering my courage, I unsheathed my knife and thrust at the shape with a shout. To my surprise, I was still in bed. My knife was sheathed, and I had just stabbed a guitar, I think. Still, it was too topically relevant of a dream, and I wanted to stay and sleep, but I also didn't want to be around whatever this was anymore. I brandished my knife and headlamp, bursting out of my door. My light whipped wildly about, looking for any evidence of this creature that had visited. But there was nothing. No footsteps, no roof ice, nothing on the ground, no metal sign attached to any tree for clanging. There was literally nothing. And so, it was at this point that I jumped into the driver's seat and I just got out of there. I slept at a nearby populated campsite until dawn, and not a single noise, even with the window wide open. So, what was that thing? What did it want? Or am I just going crazy? Surely there must be an explanation for what I just experienced, but I don't know. I'm not so sure, to be honest. As I share this, my mind keeps going back to the dream of the darkness oozing in through the ceiling. Since I slept in the populated campsite without incident, I believe that it's gone. I keep a Nazar amulet watching my bed for these kinds of superstitious reasons, I guess. It might sound silly, but I'd be lying if I said that I wasn't afraid to go to bed tonight. About 10 years ago, there was 4 of us walking through the woods local to us. To get to the best entrance to the woods, you have to walk through a crematorium. There was me, Thomas, Lisa, and Alice, and we had planned to go camping in the woods. So, we'd been camping in these woods on many occasions. I had a very easygoing mum, so the parents of the other 3 would call my mum to ask if we were having a sleepover at my house, and my mum, being nice, said yes. We were all 13 at the time. We were walking through the woods to get where we normally camped, and on the way there we walked past a man with an axe. He didn't speak and just sort of stared us out, so we walked on and just sort of brushed it off. A little bit creeped out, but didn't think too much of it. The night went on as you would expect, having fun trying to drink and not be sick, and just having a laugh with friends. We went into the tent to go to sleep at about 3 in the morning, but about 20 minutes later, we heard what sounded like trees being axed down. The sound echoed around the woods and made us all alert. This went on for about 5 minutes. Then, as soon as it sort of started to finish, Thomas joked about the man with the axe, and Alice got rather upset with him. Time passed, and just as we were about to go to sleep, we suddenly heard footsteps. They were circling around our tent, and we all sat up in shock and started to panic. We heard logs of wood being dropped outside of our tent. We could actually feel the wood as it struck the ground. We all gained the courage to finally look out of the tent, peering out. He was there. sat on the floor, staring into the tent as we opened it. We just all bailed as soon as we saw that and ran as fast as we could from them into the woods. We never did go back to get our stuff or anything, not that we really brought too much, but all of this time, all the times that I've been out there since, I never saw him again. The weird thing too was that this guy, he never seemed to talk. He was just sitting there, staring at us in the tent. 10 years on, and I still think about that night, and exactly what that guy may have been up to. So a few days back, I went into a mall a bit far from my house, and things were really good that day, but then, while I was in a KFC branch, someone on Grindr with a blank profile messaged me while waiting for my food on the table, but I shrugged it off and he didn't send me any pictures, just messages saying hi to me and asked if he could give me the best, and you can imagine what he said, I would ever have. Seeing that I'm in a public place and absolutely do not have the mood to be horny, I did not reply and then proceeded to eat my meal. After eating, I then left the mall while bringing the items that I brought from there and waited for a ride to go home. It was dark, around 8 p.m. at that time, so I had to be vigilant on my surroundings. While looking out on the road, the same guy messages me and asks me where I am currently, and I saw suddenly that his distance from me was only 70 meters away from where I was standing. This was definitely getting a bit worse, so I closed the app immediately and proceeded to continue ignoring him. Around 5 minutes later, a guy stood beside me though, trying to act sort of unsuspicious, I think, even though my gut feelings are telling me that something was wrong. He looked like he was around maybe late 30s. I'm 18, by the way, and a bit bigger than me, both height and weight. I started to get goosebumps while standing beside him, and it only got worse when he tapped on my shoulder and asked if he could do those things that he mentioned to me before. I froze, having no idea what to do, while extremely anxious, but then I suddenly just, punched him in the face when he started trying to grab my crotch and tried to unbutton my pants. I then pushed him off of me hard. He was now down on the ground, and I ran away as far as I could. But then I saw him chasing me. Luckily, a taxi drove nearby, and I rushed inside as quickly as I could. I knew that it was him who was the guy that had been spamming messages on Grindr, because his Grindr profile tells me that he's only literally 1 meter away. I blocked the profile, and I logged out of the app after that. But what I realized is that I wasn't logged out at the time. Therefore, my location was exposed, and my profile picture in the app was my face, which wasn't covered, meaning that it was easy for me to be identified. Also, the location of the mall is pretty terrible, as there isn't a lot of lights around it, and it's surrounded by really terrible looking houses and roads too. Worse yet is that there weren't really many people around where I stood at the time, and it was pretty dark where we were too, meaning I wasn't really able to identify the man correctly to report him to the local authorities, unfortunately. But also, it was the perfect place for a crime. This happened to me and my siblings when we were very young, but the memory is still very vivid. This was the most intense paranormal experience that I've had in my life, and I just wanted to get it out there. So, to start, the house that we lived in at the time was definitely haunted. My sister told me much later on that she would hear someone walking up the stairs and then a shadowy figure would stand in a doorway sometimes. I heard the footsteps back then too, but I'd always assumed that it was just her walking around. She didn't tell me until much later, obviously, as she didn't want to scare me. But the house was very creepy at night. I always felt a profound sense of being watched whenever I would go past certain spots. It was completely different when I got back home to Mum's house. I wasn't afraid of the dark, and I would still get up at night to go to the bathroom, but it always felt very scary to do so, and I would always hurry as quickly as I could. But anyway, I was 10, my big sister was 13, and my little brother was 8. I begged my older sister to let us play with a Ouija board, a keychain toy that she had, because I was fascinated by ghosts and the supernatural. I wasn't really scared of them at all, in fact. I loved them a lot and only thought that they were interesting, I guess you could say. It took a whole lot of convincing, but eventually she agreed to play with the board. So we all sat down at the kitchen table, and my sister and I put our fingers on the planchette and asked if anybody was there, to which it almost immediately said yes. We spent some time arguing that the other was definitely moving it, and just asking some benign questions I don't really remember. But after a bit, we started getting scared, so we said let's stop. The planchette immediately and harshly moved to no, though, and we instantly pulled our hands back. As soon as we did, we all hear this terrible and horrible screeching or scream, one that did not sound human at all. We each describe it a little bit differently from one another, but we all heard it at once, that was for sure. We ran as fast as we could to the other room, where we all sat sort of huddled on the couch for a long time. Finally, I asked if anybody else had heard that, to which they all just nodded. We stayed that way for hours too, until my dad came home. We didn't tell him about it, and nothing really ever came of it too, but it was terrifying. So terrifying that, to this day, recalling it always gives me chills. Also, for info on the actual sound, it was definitely not a cat. We didn't live near the woods either. We lived right in the middle of the city, so no mountain lion or anything like that too. It didn't sound like an animal call actually, but my brother said that it sort of sounded like the sound of a bunch of bats, but much, much louder. The intensity of the sound was part of it, and like someone screaming right inside of the kitchen. To me, it was a lot like a woman's scream, but distorted, like it was more than one voice maybe. To those who just don't want to believe it's anything otherworldly, well, yeah, that's totally okay, and I don't know what else to say to you. I'm just telling you my experience. That's totally your choice, and like I said, I'm just telling my story for those who might be interested. So I'm staying at my friend's house in Tennessee over winter break, and tonight I helped her feed the neighbor's dogs because they were out of town. Her house is in a somewhat rural area. There's clusters of homes kind of sort of spread out across fields, forests, and lake areas, all very beautiful and lots of wildlife. Anyways, it's about 9 p.m. and it's way past sunset. It's quite dark, and we're walking the short distance from the neighbor's house back to hers. We're on a road that, sort of directly next to us, is a small set of woods sloping down into the lake. I'm a little nervous about it, so I make a joke like, that forest is kind of creeping me out. Imagine if there's a skinwalker in there. My friend said it's bad luck to share it or say it, but I didn't know that until after this event, and I'm not taking any chances, so she laughs and gobbles like a turkey loudly into the forest. She's like this, and I jokingly say, don't do that, it might attract one. And not even 5 seconds later, we hear an identical gobble back at us from the forest. It was definitely not an echo too, and there was no light in there, no paths, and it was very cold, like 30 degrees, so I can't imagine anyone would be out there. But I just remember saying, oh my goodness, then sprinting as fast as I could back to the house. I don't think I've ever run so fast or meaningfully too. I didn't turn back, and I was completely out of breath when we got back to the house. My friend thought the whole thing was kind of funny, but also freaky. But I just cannot get over the fact that we heard that sound repeated back at us, and there's just no way that an animal would make that kind of noise, especially not so accurately. Anyway, does anyone know what this might be? Maybe it was just someone trying to be funny or something? I don't know. I'm really confused by it, and it was a really freaky situation. When I was a kid in Mexico, we loved to play hide and seek with all the kids in the neighborhood at night. The houses were so close together, in fact, that you could jump from roof to roof, and with everybody sort of knowing each other and being friendly, they wouldn't mind if we did get on the roof. We had my cousins come over for dinner, and our parents were just out in the porch talking, having a couple of drinks. Some of the kids, they came over and asked if we wanted to play. It was already dark out, and this is when we especially liked to play, so we agreed. And there was this one girl too that I had a thing for at the time, and they also happened to join that night, and I knew that if I could get her alone, I might have a chance to kiss her. I knew that she liked me too, so it would work out. We all gathered in the middle of the street, and we randomly chose who would count, then all the other kids would run and hide. So as the kids started counting, I looked at the girl waving at her to come follow me. Holding my hand, I led her to my aunt's house, which was vacant at the time. She was on vacation, and I knew the house was empty. I didn't see any other kids go in there. The front door was locked, so we ran to the back and checked if it was locked too. And it was, but at the back of the house, my aunt had an old washing machine that I knew that we could get on the roof from there. I helped her up first, and when we got up, we could hear someone coming, and I told her to go and hide, and she ran off. I was able to make it on the roof not long after. I knew for sure that somebody was searching the house next to my aunt's. It was having the second story redone, and I hid in a sort of half-completed bathroom. I thought that I was alone too, but at some point I felt someone grab my hand. It was pitch black in there, I couldn't see who it was, but I heard a soft voice whisper, "It's just me, don't worry." It was most definitely her, so she squeezed my hand a little bit more. We hid for some time, and it was great. But then, from afar, we could all hear the kids saying, "We give up," and we had won the round. I came out of the bathroom and looked down at the street where all the other kids were. And that was when I saw her, clear as day, looking at me. I froze. If she was down there, then whose hand was I holding? Slowly turning my head, I could still feel the grip of whoever's hand I was holding with it, still being dark. And all I could manage to see was the faint outline of someone with, like, glowing sort of red eyes looking right in my face. When I say glowing, I don't mean like fully glowing, but they look sort of a bit red. At that, I absolutely panicked. I got down from the roof and I jumped down to where the kids were, and they were all pointing up and behind me, asking me who that was. They could see the outline of someone up there too, and also what looked like red eyes. We stopped playing immediately and went inside one of the other kids' houses. We talked about what we saw, but only briefly before going back outside again. But when we did, whoever was there was now gone. So this is the most wild and crazy thing that I've ever experienced. And I know that it sounds absolutely insane, but I just have to tell someone, and I really would like to try and find some answers for whatever the heck this was. So when I was 20 years old, I was driving past Parker, Arizona, when my boyfriend accidentally took a wrong turn. We quickly realized something was wrong too, because as soon as we turned that corner, it was like everything just went dark. Like there was absolutely no sun anywhere. Keep in mind, it was about 1 or 2 p.m. in the spring. There's no mountains anywhere or large trees or anything. Nothing that could cast like a massive shadow or anything. It was clear blue skies, and then all of a sudden it was just pitch black. No buildings or noises, just blank emptiness. We turned the headlights on, in fact, because it was that dark, when all of a sudden there was a big white sign on the side of what I believe was a road. On the side it said, in big letters, "They're here, turn around, now." We both looked at each other and we just said, yeah, to heck with that. And we quickly turned around. After a while, we found the freeway again, and it was honestly like the sun just came back on. We went home and we decided that we would just probably never speak about it to anyone because it was just so weird. But to be honest, I've been haunted by this experience, this really weird and creepy thing that happened to us, my whole life, and still to this day I just have no idea what to think about it. I'm a 22-year-old female now, and I still get goosebumps thinking about the situation and whether or not I would even be here today had I not been such an untrusting child. So I used to ride my bike around my neighborhood and through the local parks a lot when I was younger, being a generally safe area at the time. Not so much now, but I digress. My parents felt comfortable with me riding my bike alone as long as I stayed nearby. And one summer afternoon, when I was 10 years old or so, I can't be certain as it was a long time ago, but it was around 9 or 10, I decided to ride my bike through the park near my elementary school. I ended up running into a friend and her mum at the playground there and spent a bit of time with them before they left. Looking back, I don't recall noticing anyone lingering nearby, but I was an oblivious kid having fun at the park, so there very well could have been, but I just didn't see them. Anyway, I wasn't really having much fun at the park by myself, so I decided to get back on my bike. It was then, though, that a man, maybe late 30s or 40s, approached me pretty much out of nowhere. I was sitting on my bike, kickstand still down, when he came up to me and asked me what my name was. I was a very shy kid, so I don't think that I said anything in response, but he didn't seem to care. He told me that I was a very pretty little girl and that he had a daughter my age that I could come play with. In addition to being extremely shy, my parents had also taught me about the whole stranger danger thing, so I wasn't about to go with this man. After I shook my head at him, I remember him smiling at me in the most unnerving way before putting his hand on my shoulder. I felt uncomfortable the whole encounter, but it wasn't until this moment that I really felt afraid. I quickly kicked the kickstand up and pedaled away as fast as I could manage. I didn't bother looking back until I made it onto the streets just outside of the park. He thankfully hadn't followed me, but I still felt scared, so I went home. I never told my parents or anybody else about this encounter. I know that I probably should have, but for some reason my kid brain thought that I would get in trouble and not be allowed to ride my bike anymore, so I decided to just forget about it. Looking back now, it makes me feel nauseous to think about what might have happened to me had I gone with that man or hesitated to pedal away. I'm very thankful that my parents had been serious about teaching me not to talk to or go out with strangers. I'm maybe even a bit thankful for my social anxiety, as honestly, it probably saved my skin that day. So I think that this all started with the nightmares. I've had a history in the past with ghosts and ghouls. A ghost attached itself to my brother when we were younger and would angrily throw things at him. We named her Cadence. My sister said Cadence would play hide and seek with her, showing up in the corner of her eye, only to duck out of view when my sister would turn to look at her. And when I moved out at 16, Cadence didn't follow me. And this, whatever I'm dealing with, is something different, more negative. It started earlier this week, like I said, with the nightmares. The first one was about Kisaragi Station. If you don't know what it is, you can look it up, but I encountered many people at the station, and when I got on, I arrived at a giant field with a dog. I don't really remember much after that. I also don't remember the second nightmare. The third, however, was yesterday night. In it, I was being chased through a small portal under some stairs. But writing this now, I'm realizing that my last apartment had a staircase with a giant hole under it too. My cat ran under there once, and I felt nearly feral with primal fear that gripped me when I got close to that hole, but anyway, in the nightmare, the person chasing me was a cannibal. I don't know how I knew, but I just knew it in the dream, and we eventually came to a standoff. I was really close to her, but just out of her sight, and she was sort of looking away, but all she had to do was turn and she would see me. And she did. She turned slowly, eyes wide as she stared at me. I stared back in complete terror. She saw me and reached out to me, grabbing my hand harshly. and I woke up, slowly, filled with chest-crunching terror. I could still feel the woman's grip on my hand as I woke up, in fact, nearly crushing my fingers. For context, I sleep curled up every night, sometimes on my back, but never with my hand anywhere near the edge of my full-sized bed. But I woke up with my hand dangling off the side of my bed, reaching out. I suddenly felt eyes on me from the closet and stared. With complete certainty, the only thought that I had was demon. Spooked like heck, I stayed awake and considered asking my Catholic roommate to bless my room, or at least the apartment. Silly, right? But my roommate had done it before and it was all fine. That is, until my cat broke their Mary statue. After the statue broke, that was when the smell started, like something had rotted in our apartment. My roommate's senior cat started getting nervous too. She used to never meow, but she meows constantly now, and one time we even heard her on the other side of the apartment while we were checking the mail, and we just heard her screeching like crazy. Confused, we rushed back over to our apartment on the other floor and opened our apartment door to find the cat staring at the door and practically howling at it. This morning, we also found a huge bloodstain on my roommate's pillow. Frowning, I checked her cat over because we thought maybe the cat had bled on it, but she was spotless. My roommate shrugged it off, and eventually we just washed the bloodstains off. But that was definitely really weird. Anyway, what do you guys think? Is this a demon? Can anyone give me some guidance on how to handle this? I feel like I'm going crazy over all of this, and I'd really like some help. When I was a kid, for a long time, my family and I lived in an apartment building in Chicago. In this building, we experienced, many weird things that felt sort of evil, I guess. One of the experiences that I had, I wanted to share with all of you. So, to get into this apartment building, you sort of had to enter through a gate. After entering the gate, you would just follow the cemented path would probably take maybe 5 seconds to get to some stairs. Going up the stairs, you would see windows to the first floor apartment straight ahead. Looking to the right, there would be a door that would allow you to enter the apartment complex. And now, entering through this door would take you to an extremely small room with 2 doors. The door to the left would take you to the first floor apartment. The door to the right would take you to the apartment where I lived, the second floor. As you entered through the door to the right, it would lead to an almost spiral staircase. After reaching the top of the stairs, you would yet again reach another door, which would actually take you fully inside the second floor apartment. Opening the door, you would immediately see the living room. So one afternoon, I was home alone watching anime in the living room. I was maybe 15 when this happened, and I remember hearing someone open up the first door to get into the building, and the second door to get into the second floor apartment. I began to hear someone walk up the stairs. At this time of day, I was under the assumption that either my mum was done with work or my brother was done with wrestling practice, getting home, which I was excited to not be home by myself. As the footsteps get closer to the door, I glanced at the bottom of the door, which I then saw a shadow there. Usually at this moment I would hear keys, as someone would be preparing to unlock the door. But in this incident, I didn't. I just saw a shadow under the door. I also started to hear like a slow scratching sound starting from the top of the door to the bottom. I honestly thought that my brother was being an idiot, playing a prank on me, so I just let it be and continued watching TV. As I was watching TV, I noticed the scratching continued on the door, getting more and more intense, and the shadow of someone was still present under the door. At this point, I was getting pretty annoyed too, because I was like, dude, I'm trying to watch TV, quit playing games with me. So I got up from the couch and went to the door, and I smashed it open. But as I sort of swung it open, I looked around and I didn't see my mum or my brother or anyone. So then I thought, this idiot is behind the door. So I checked behind the door and no one was there either. I did check the back of the door though, and I did see scratch marks on my door. At this, my heart started racing, and I ran down the stairs and ran out of my apartment, called my brother up, and he was still at wrestling, and my mum was still out too. So then, the question is, who the heck was scratching at my door like that? So I was 8 in 1994 and living in Staten Island. Back then I would walk to the store by myself. My parents didn't really watch me and sometimes would even ask me to buy them cigarettes. And one time I was walking and an old 70s brown Buick was following me slowly. Then, close to the store, he pulled up next to me and was trying to get me to help him with something. I was a pretty smart kid who could take care of herself, probably from being left alone so often, so I knew that this was really shady. I ran a few blocks until I got to the store and went inside, and a few minutes later, he walks in and is following me through the aisles. I quickly thought to tell the clerk, but I didn't trust him either. I'd already had a lot of bad things happen to me at this point in my life and didn't really trust anyone. So then I thought to use the payphone and call my parents collect. So that's what I did and really loudly said that I don't feel safe and someone's following me. The dude ran out of the store so quickly after that. My dad picked me up and he spent the rest of the day looking for this car, and I didn't get the license plate, so we never found him. But I think about this a lot because it's not like he gave up after that too. I'm sure that he must have found a victim eventually, and to me, that's perhaps the most heartbreaking thing about this, is that I couldn't stop that.